We're live.
Okay, well, good morning. We're going to spend most of today discussing and assessing our event from last weekend, Friday and Saturday, titled Freedom and Sacrifice in Our Beloved Struggle, a tribute to Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. And I think the discussion will broaden into a broader discussion about the meaning of Martin Luther King Jr. for the people today. James Lawson, and just wrap it into an assessment of where we're going, what did we achieve in the event, what has yet to be achieved, and have that conversation. So I know Jeremiah will come in with his assessment as well, and others should feel free to too. But I just wanted to begin with a very general, broad assessment of the two-day event. In free school, these past years after events, we have these political assessments to really assess what was our political objective going into the event. Did we achieve the political objective? And what did the event show us that we need to do more in the future? So I did just want to start this by saying more and more with each year, as free school, as a collective of people serious about change, as people who consider themselves revolutionaries, that with each year, I think I have a clear sense of, especially with this event, I have a criteria that's two main points in politically assessing an event. And you could maybe argue three, but my criteria that I'm constantly thinking about during the event and after the event is, one, what was our relationship? How was our relationship to the political objective of now? What was the stage of history? What is the stage of history? Did we successfully close the gap between us and the stage of history? Did we mount the stage of history? And in some ways, I even connect that to a criteria of, were we able to get closer to the truth? Did we say what needed to be said in the fierce urgency of now? In an assessment of today, the moment, where the people must head, what the people must know. So that's the first pillar of how I am assessing the event. The second is, did we successfully speak to the people? Did we change the relationship between us and the people? What was our relationship with us and the people? And then the third, I usually say internally, but I'll just say now, like I usually tend to not say this on live stream, but I will anyways, which is, the third is I'm always assessing, how did we as revolutionaries mature, transform through the process? Ideologically, morally, spiritually, socially, how did we change? So I just wanted to start with that criteria.
Could you say the first point once again?
The first was, did we achieve our political objective? And more specifically, did we enter a higher stage of history, higher stage of struggle? Did we enter the stage of history? Did we successfully achieve, as revolutionaries, the stage of history that must be entered upon? Or another way of saying it is, did we actually address the truth? Did we address the truth? Did we address the revolutionary edge of the truth that must be addressed? Because that's the point of many of our events. We're trying to hit upon a certain nexus of the truth that we think is important to revolutionary progress, to the forward movement of history. So I'll begin with my assessment as someone who played a role in planning the event, that I think, and I'd be interested if other people in the organizing committee, especially you, Doc, and other members of the committee would agree, that I think when we were framing this event, we saw it as putting forward our revolutionary vision of, in this 250th year of the United States, we believe this is our vision, and in some ways you could argue that it's a theory to be tested through this event, that in a time of unprecedented civilizational crisis, like unseen before in our history, that the people, ordinary people, the people need and have been searching for King, Martin Luther King Jr., and the Black freedom movement in particular. That on the cusp of a potential fourth American revolution, the possibilities of a fourth American Revolution, that the people need King, and in fact, perhaps have been searching for King, that we have not grieved King's assassination and what it meant for the people. Two other ways of talking about this vision that have been formative for us, especially leading up to the event, is James Lawson, who we have been calling the architect of the Black freedom movement of the 50s and 60s. James Lawson had a formulation that Jeremiah had raised months ago, that Black people and Black people's struggle are the bridge between a white civilization that has caused mayhem and chaos, the bridge between white civilization that has caused mayhem and chaos to humanity, but also more than just humanity, that Black people are the bridge to a new world, a new heaven. That's another way of putting forward that vision. Another way of putting forward the vision is Martin Luther King Jr. has a formulation where he says, and he says this even in the SCLC would hold retreats, speaking of retreats, they would hold retreats every single year in South Carolina, the Sea Islands, in this town called Frogmore, internal staff retreats to discuss assessing the movement, strategy, the path forward. Even in as late as 1967, 1968, King was talking candidly to the staff at the SCLC in a language that he used even in the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, 1956, where he says, there will be a day when people will say there lived a great people, a Black people, who with white allies injected new meaning into the veins of civilization. So that's another way of describing what I think in Free School is our vision in the 250th, in a time of unprecedented crisis. We're defining both the crisis for the people and we're defining the way out. Our revolutionary inheritance, our revolutionary strategy, our revolutionary vision for a human future. Can there be a human future that is achieved? How and by whom? The way I wanted to assess this is how successful was the vision? Did the vision speak to the people? Was our formulation of the vision correct? Did we do it in the right language? Did we hit on the right points? That's kind of how I want to assess it. I'll just say as like a big driver of the first evening event, the revolutionary narrative, it was an attempt to not just say our vision, but to really show the vision in talking about what is the unfinished American story and whose story is it? Putting forward a narrative of an unfinished democratic revolution in America. It is not just the story of Black people, but it's to say the story of the betrayal of the Black proletariat is a betrayal of democracy by a consolidation of white supremacy and all the different actors in that. And hence it is a story of the American people in becoming. If the American people will have a future, they will have to contend with the betrayal of the Black proletariat and hence the betrayal of democracy itself. Trying to make that not just something we intellectualize or talk about, to make it concrete through history, recitations, art, a narrative of us, a narrative of a self-conceptualization of the people who don't yet exist but must achieve themselves if we're going to achieve a democracy, achieve justice, et cetera, et cetera. I think especially, and it's hard because it's hard because I was emceeing, so it would help for other people to talk about how people responded. I do think we were successful. I think the people in the audience who were there at Mother Beth, I think there was around 75 people who came to that first evening. Whether they came for the stylistics, whether they came for the revolutionary narrative, whether they came because they were congregation members, I'm not completely sure. I'll kind of go into a breakdown of that.
Probably over 100.
Okay, over 100. All I know is I ordered food for 50 people and we ran out of food. That's the only numerical assessment I can do. Maybe close to 100, but based upon people's vocal response, body language, when especially the narrative, that introduction where we set the scene of where in the clock of history are we as a people. I think people did respond. People responded well to us giving an explicit explanation of the crisis around us. Why is there mayhem? Why is there chaos? There's no way you can go out into the world and not feel the tension of a society, of a system that does no longer work, and in fact is an enemy of life itself, an enemy of people. I think people responded well to this explanation of crisis as not just an economic crisis, not just a fascist crisis, a crisis of fascism, a crisis of Trump that can easily be resolved through policy reform or be resolved through electing a new president or a new party. But people responded well to a clear vision we were putting forward, that this is a crisis of two battling civilizations. One that is incompatible with democracy, one that has a way of life and has definitions that inherently requires the destruction of human spirit, a destruction of human dignity, to make it concrete, a degradation of Black people, that believes it is okay that you can have democracy while subjugating a group of people, and that has implications for everyone. I think people responded really well to our explanation of that crisis. Like, speaking, this is my more biased perspective, but I was really happy that I think there were some doubters whether, the whole thing of like representatives of young people standing up and asking these life and death questions. I think people were not sure if it would work. I myself was a little concerned. Thank you to the actors, Alice Blaze and Gloria, who's not here, for really giving it their all, because it really depended on you guys believing in it. I think people responded well to the dynamism of that. I do think it reflected attention in society, which it was supposed to be for. It helped set up what to me was a strongest sign of a confirmation of this aspect of the vision, which is it led into that dramatic moment where I paused and said, in this time of life and death questions of the youth and children, who may not be saying it with their words, but show it in their actions. You could even connect gun violence, for example, to this. That is a manifestation, expression of the life and death questions of a society, of a collapsing civilization, collapsing society, in need of revolutionary answers. But when I paused and then said, whose voice have we been looking for 250 years? Martin Luther King Jr. explains Iran when he talks about Vietnam. And then King's voice comes through the speakers. I really felt like there was a shift, a vibe shift in the room, that whether people came into this thinking that they wanted King or not, I think in that moment, people emotionally responded viscerally in a way that proved King is the one. King is the voice, that his explanation of the Vietnam War as not just a war in that specific moment in time, but a reflection of a deeper spiritual malady of American life, of the American way of life. That there will be more Vietnams. There will be a Guatemala. There will be a Venezuela. There'll be a Cuba. There'll be a Iran. There'll be a Palestine. That King, the way he connected all of this to, this is a confrontation that will have to end one day. A confrontation of the three evils of militarism, white supremacy, and poverty, materialism. I definitely think people it showed that the people, it's true, whether people realize they were at this moment or not, we're in a time where the people need King, where people want King, his voice, but also his formulations, his explanation. I also think the part of King's speech that people resonated with was when that part where King says, how can I walk the streets of Chicago and tell these kids not to be violent without me first confronting the greatest purveyor of violence, my own government? And I think that really speaks to a city like Philly. I just think because I think the question of youth is on everyone in Philly's mind. And so I just think there are formulations there. King's voice, the way he connects the revolutionary struggle to the moral struggle, the revolutionary values. There's so much in there for us to break down that the people need, the people are prepared for. And I think I remember, like, yes, I confirmed, Doc, I did ask you, I was like, will the people like it?
Yes,
Will people like it? And I remember you saying to me, you were like, well, I don't know, but you're setting a really high bar by even bringing so much history, bringing so much together, even bringing the world struggle in. I think you had mentioned you're like bringing in Sukarno, who didn't end up getting to recite, but bringing in Lumumba and Farrakhan and bringing all those voices together is setting a very high political bar for the people. And I remember at the time being like, really? Is it that high? And you were like, no, it is high. And I think our assessment is that the people are at that level. There still exists a consciousness that is already there. At least the people in that room. And okay, so I'll start there. The second point I want to assess is this is generally a political point I'm always thinking about, whether we have events or not, which is our relationship to people's institutions. Are we, through our vision, bringing closer the existing capacity, no matter how big or small we think it is, the existing lingering dispensation or capacity of people's institutions, Black churches, especially the Black religious institutions, who I think we really tried to bring together in this specific event, because we believed King is a reflection of the moral edge of Black religious thought that still exists, or that we hope still exists. I am very proud that, in particular, I think we have become, through this event, much closer to the congregation of Mother Bethel. And I think we're seeing things about the congregation about Mother Bethel. Like, I think we're learning things about, even what I said about that, I do think there are a lot of members from Mother Bethel at that Friday event in particular. There was this one woman who I befriended during the Freedom School, when we did the Black God's Freedom School with Mother Bethel. And she was at the event, and she came up to me and we hugged, and she said, "I'm so proud of you guys." And it was, she said, "I'm so proud of this." And then the soloist from the Mother Bethel choir, she stayed for the whole event. And she came up to so many of us and she said, "We should be doing this every Friday." It's a yearning for us getting to not just having, people weren't there just to have fun. It was not just because the stylistics were there. Yes, people love the stylistics. We can talk about why they love the stylistics, but like people, there's a yearning for us coming together as different peoples to address the existential questions of our city, our people, our youth, to do it in a way that addresses it with the moral urgency of now. I also think, like, to me, a really shining, and the fact that we even had that event at Mother Bethel is very significant. Like, I think this is something I was very humbled in through the process of planning this event. You cannot underestimate Richard Allen. Richard Allen's role in history, world history, is significant. He and Absalom Jones have to be treated as revolutionaries. These are people who, as early as the 1700s, enslaved people who, through buying their own freedom, or because their slave owner was a Quaker who then was like, "Oh, actually, I should set you free." The fact that so early in US history, even before 1776, these are men who were born before 1776, who so early thought when they got their freedom, were not like, "Okay, I'm just gonna go to Canada," like, which I'm not blaming them for, but they took their freedom and did something with it, created the Free African Society. They created these nexuses where even Paul Robeson's grandfather, who was this baker who they created a network of revolutionaries, basically. I mean, the history of resistance goes so early, even before the founding of 1776. And I just think Mother Bethel as this organization, this power of freedom coming from this man, this revolutionary, not just a religious leader, a revolutionary, a political leader, a leader of thought, a leader of men who refuse to let go of and abandon the ideal of democracy, even when the founding fathers themselves did not know how to get to democracy completely. That is something to really take seriously. It's true when Cavness was like, to carry this historical weight and to keep this institution alive, not just as a building, but try to keep it alive as a people's institution. In some ways, that's a revolutionary act. It is a huge weight. And what these institutions are up against, too. The way that after the civil rights movement, the state, the ruling class, created new creative ways through foundations, through nonprofits, through money systems, to put so much pressure on these churches, these institutions, who are already struggling financially to keep up these large buildings, these large systems. I mean, what you're up against is huge, and most institutions have fallen. I mean, can you blame them? It's so much weight to financially even keep these places afloat. Okay, I'm gonna try to move faster because I'm talking a lot. Okay, yeah, Calvinists. I think for us, I think we became close to Calvinists. I think we became close to St. Thomas, who we didn't have a relationship with. St. Thomas is also a very important institution, still highly organized people. I just think there is still a spiritual worldview of freedom that still exists and that is dispensed, that we are creating, like that we are also producing an ideological ground for it to like barnacle itself on. Okay, institution, people, oh yeah, the Nation of Islam had a strong presence at the event. Brother John, his wife, and the minister's wife from Delaware, the Delaware Mosque, Brother Calvin, Brother Jabril, other members of Muhammad Mosque number 12 in Philly, members of the Lucien Blackwell Library from the reading group. And I also think the presence of those two high schoolers, Naima, who's Doc's granddaughter, and Jalen from Kennett Square High School is significant. I raise all this because I think the event was successful because we are also actively engaging in the way we have to as revolutionaries, which is we are attempting through the ideological struggle, through our vision, and through the way we do politics, through these events, we're beginning to see some of the crystallization, the condensation of the remaking people's institutions, different sections of what we hope to be the vanguard with us is we're seeing the beginnings of a potential remaking of the city, potential restructuring of the revolutionary edge of the city. That's how I would frame it. If we're gonna like take a step back and think about where are we. Okay, this is really my last point. So my last point is the truth and the future. So like our relationship to the truth and where do we go from here? I think my takeaways, my political assessments in terms of the truth of like what it would take to even achieve power, like achieve concrete power in the city, the people achieving power. First of all, I already said it, but I want to say it again. I think the people need king. I think it's very clear the people need king. And I think we have to see it as our responsibility to do better, do more. I think we are still rediscovering king. I'm not convinced that I think it was clear from the event that I'm not convinced that we have totally, for ourselves, made clear through a philosophic and political way, ideological way. We have to be more specific and find new ways, both understand king better and find new languages for explaining king. King in that revolutionary core of the Third American Revolution, the Black freedom struggle. Why nonviolence? Why is nonviolence revolutionary? Why is nonviolence not a passive thing? How did Lawson see it? How did King see it? Even King's formulations from the Chicago Freedom Movement, for example, that King's later formulations that the North shows that we are in need of not just legal restructuring, but a complete restructuring of society. What does that mean? How did he address it? How was he beginning to address it? What does it mean for this revolutionary core to see themselves as going beyond Western civilization, to create a new civilization? What does that mean? How are they addressing it? And then nonviolence as an antidote to white supremacy. And I think that's why, Doc, you are really connecting James Lawson and Henry Winston of the Communist Party USA. This is the kind of the revolutionary nexus of ideas I think we ought to explore more seriously and systematically and find new languages, new ways of presenting it to the people, engaging it with the people. But yes, I think the people need king. I also think another takeaway I had was something we should never underestimate, especially as many of us in this room are descendants of Asian civilizations, non-American civilizations, that this concept of a single garment of destiny, that there's something very powerful. It affected people Friday evening in the room when you use the world struggle as a mirror of why the Black struggle, why the Black freedom struggle is a revolutionary struggle. I think I had many people who came up to me and said, and it kind of surprised me because like personally, like when I was putting together narrative, there's certain speeches I had more affinity for. People were very moved by Shantanu reading Ramesh Chandra's speech. Because I think for me, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, this Indian man talking about king. Because for me, I'm like, oh, I'm like Ramesh, blah, blah, blah. For a lot of people in that room, to hear Romesh be able to so accurately recognize king as a revolution, to have the affirmation of the world's people struggling for freedom, affirming king, affirming the Black freedom struggle as an equivalent liberation struggle, I think is huge. I really think the more we can show that this is part of a single garment of destiny, a single battle against white supremacy, that this is a huge, all humanity struggle against those three concrete evils, that man's destiny is to overcome, to defeat white supremacy, militarism, and poverty, materialism, that there's a single garment of destiny that exists in the 21st century. This is the human stage of history we're at. I think that is very powerful. And it's also why I regret, I think I should have refined the narrative more in terms of timing. I should have shortened some things, I should have sped up certain things. I felt bad that we were a little rushed for time, but I felt really bad that we had to let go of 2 King audio clips, 3 Dimensions of a Complete Life, and Letter from a Birmingham Jail that we put together. And then we also had to let go of, Albert was supposed to recite part of Sukarno's opening speech at Bandung, which has a lot of formulations that are very reminiscent of King. And I know Albert had texted me and was like, reading this speech was very moving. There's something very moving when you realize that human beings from different civilizations around the world are not different, not very different from people like King, Shuttlesworth, the way that the revolutionaries of America are seeing like the ultimate struggle against Western values, against the ruling class who makes war, et cetera, et cetera. The other speech recitation we had to let go of was Yahya Sinwar's, part of Yahya Sinwar's last will of testament, which I'm really sad we had to let go of. It's just when you hear Yahya Sinwar talk about how he's like, my life only has meaning because I will forever fight for freedom for my people. I mean, you just can't help but be like, what the Palestinian people are going through, it sounds exactly like the African American struggle. I think these connections are so important for us to make. Oh yeah, and I also think it plays a huge role in what is currently the paramount struggle, which is the struggle against war, the struggle for peace. Because when we talk, we say this refrain a lot, man must know man. Okay, cool. Yes, we all agree with that. Beautiful, beautiful phrase, deep phrase. To make it concrete, man knowing man is people in that room hearing Yahya Sinwar, hearing Sukarno, hearing Lumumba, hearing Ramesh Chandra, and realizing we are part of a single garment of destiny. That creates a certain ideological and human level of bonding. It's a human bond, it creates the conditions for love, for solidarity, that makes war impossible. That creates the foundation for a peace movement. It allows you to see the Palestinian people as your own. It allows you to see what's happening in Iran as not any different, any separate than the ravage of society you see in Philly or around yourself. And I just think there's something really important about these connections, these ideological connections. And I just don't want us to ever lose the power of putting the world struggle with the Black freedom struggle together. My last thing about the truth and moving toward the future is I want to talk about the town hall, which I think Jeremiah will talk more about too. I think the town hall left me with a lot of takeaways. I think the town hall was like probably, the strongest part of the 2-day event. And the reason why I feel that way is because to have that level of candid conversation about the Black church, which has played such an important role in the history of not just the Black freedom struggle, but the Black church as a foundation of Black civilization. Black civilization and alternative civilization to white supremacy. To have a really candid conversation around the Black church today, to have cabinets be open, to have Art Sudler of St. Thomas be open. I really actually paid a lot of attention to a formulation Doc made, where Doc was like, the Black church as an institution as an institution of governance, as an institution of democracy, it takes so much to even, especially in this moment, to keep people ideologically together, to keep this thing together, to hold on, to even hold on to it today. Like, just take Mother Bethel. That it kind of makes you realize that King, because I was reading about his 1967 staff retreat in Frogmore. SCLC had that like very contentious staff retreat about the Poor People's Campaign, where the staff were basically like, I don't know what we're doing. Have we even achieved anything? Those internal conversations were the basis of King's book, Where Do We Go From Here? Those speeches from Where Do We Go From Here really were supposed to be internal speeches from that staff retreat in 1967. It said that King was so broken by all those doubts during that retreat that he stayed in his room for an afternoon and refused to leave. And he said this thing where he was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I want to just go back to my little church and preach. I don't want to be a leader of this revolution anymore. Yeah. And it reminded me of how that discussion in town hall where we made the statement that King, in some ways, he comes out of the Black church, but King, to reach the next stage of the revolutionary struggle, he had to let go of some of those church responsibilities to become basically a revolutionary. Mm-hmm. And it kind of was just, to me, it really impacted me because I think we're constantly trying to figure out what are we doing in free school? Who are we? What's our role? What's our role in social change? And I just think it was informative because it's like, it helps you realize that the Black religious institutions to this day, I still think are significant. The Nation of Islam, the Black churches, various Black churches, not all of them, but Black churches, United House of Prayer for All People, even Father Divine's Peace Mission. Mm-hmm. There's a worldview that is very important to take seriously and to see as a living worldview of resistance, of freedom. But I think in some ways it helped me understand that I think free school, the reason, one, it explains why we're so attracted to Black religious institutions, why we want to stay so close to them. Mm-hmm. And it also helps explain that, like, I think in some ways we see ourselves as very similar to something like an SCLC, not exactly like the SCLC, but we see ourselves, it helps paint the SCLC as a revolutionary vanguard, a revolutionary core. They're not just a group of pastors. Mm-hmm. They're a group of revolutionaries who come out of this fertile ground of freedom, this fertile ground of resistance that is the Black church. And okay, I think I'll stop there because I know I talked for a while, but that was a big takeaway from the town hall. And I think it was also really deep when Calvinists and Sudler were even like, when Art Sudler were, especially Calvinists, when Calvinists was basically talking about how difficult it is to hold these institutions that are very important still, but that even assessing that the people, the Black community are not totally in the church. Even to say, why is it that most of 50% of Black Philadelphians identify themselves as Muslims? Or to even, but I mean, it's not like they're non-religious, but they're seeking a moral worldview of guidance. It's just not being met by the church anymore. And then I also think the way Calvinist was also so candid, and this is why, like, I really look up to her. I really respect her. When she was like, well, I need help. We need to do it together. How do you talk to the congregation about Iran? How do we move forward together? How do we show that the solution is not to just destroy, let the Black church, let people's institutions just go down, but how do you fight for there to be a revolutionary future? How do you fight for there to be a broad people's future? How do you take what we still have and crystallize it once again? Give it that moral edge, give it that revolutionary edge, give it a vision of the future. And I just felt like that town hall really was a conversation about our revolutionary strategies. And at the end of the day, the conversation that happened was basically like, the unspoken question that Jeremiah brought up was basically like, does the Black church still have a role in the revolutionary strategy? Does a revolutionary strategy
I think he asked a different kind of question. Is the Black church still committed to King? Isn't that the way you asked it?
Yeah, but it's connected to...
Yeah, but see, that's very important to you, what you're saying. I just want to, I think it was specifically about King and the Black church.
Right.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that was the end. So those are just beginning kind of beginning framework and thoughts for assessing the event, and not just what it shows about the future of free school, where we go from here, but also about us assessing more concretely the American, if there is to be a people struggle, where is it going? Where are the people at? Where must it go? Yeah, sorry I talked so much.
No. Yeah, I wanted to thank you for the beginning parts of what you said, which were how you see the objectives of events like these, because I think that's really important. And in some ways, it's a little bit challenging with free school, because let's say back during the 60s, when you had a nonviolent campaign, the objectives were very clear. Like, let's say if you were trying to desegregate at a very basic level, desegregate the lunch counters in Nashville, for example. Very clear objectives that the people can all understand. I think part of what makes our task difficult is that we still have our own objectives, what we're trying to achieve, but it's for a different time and meeting new conditions. And I think in many ways, how I see free school, in line with what Emily is saying, how I see free school and what we're trying to do is that we are at a broad level attempting to discover the methods and the terms of revolutionary politics and democratic struggle for this century, for this time. Something that I don't think anyone has really figured out, to be honest. And if I were to narrow it down more concretely or more specifically to how I see our task, is that, like in the Declaration, when we say, this is a time for the moral remaking of the American people, I really feel that we are attempting to help facilitate, to bring into being like a kind of moral and ideological reconstruction of the people, of their consciousness, in a way where it's not just going back to the Third American Revolution, but even the Second American Revolution, like, that was a time in which society had been laid to waste by war. And actually, like I was talking about it with Emily yesterday, but I really like the way that you had said, in some ways, what the American people have gone through over this past generation is akin to kind of like an ideological atom bomb being dropped on society, especially on the Black proletariat. And so we are attempting to reconstruct the moral foundations, the ideological foundations that would give rise to essentially a revolutionary people's movement for the future. And I think for this event, what I felt was the way that I phrased it for myself was, we were trying to explore a testable hypothesis, which is, does Martin Luther King Jr. still speak to the people?
Yeah.
But even more so for us, it's not just this kind of passive thing, but can we make him speak to the people? That's our, and I think something that I felt very strongly coming out of this event is that we have assumed a certain level of responsibility of translating even King into a sense of political urgency. Otherwise, I think people have anxieties, they have fears, they have concerns about the future, about their children, but it takes, I think, actual struggle and political courage and strategy to translate that into a sense of urgency about what is the task, how can we achieve this, how can we come together to try to tackle these questions. And yeah, I just feel like what we did very well was to not treat King in the abstract, but to try to bring him, like I said, to the present, to today, and to the future. And I think I went back actually to, I was thinking about the meeting that we had Emily, Doc, Kathy, and I with Reverend Cavanis, where we basically presented the vision of this event to her. And I think it wasn't just the total arc of the vision of the event, which was it's overwhelming for anyone to like listen to it, but I think it was like specific things which I think really won her over, which were those questions that Emily put at the very beginning of the narrative of like, am I meant to die? Like, where are we headed? World War, Civil War, or revolutionary democracy? Like, are children born to die? Are we just meant to be poor? All of those things. I think that, for me, based off of my assessment and my observations, I feel like that was the spark that she's like, oh, yes, because those are the deep-seated questions that she also thinks about, which I think many people think about. And those are the existential questions that confront the people, which don't have easy answers. And so I felt like that initial conversation for me was very eye-opening in terms of even what Reverend Calvinist was responding to and how she saw herself and her congregation as part of the vision of the event. Especially given the fact that, like, even the way that she talked in the town hall, she's so busy. The church has so much stuff going on. I think we should have never taken for granted that we would even be able to do the event at Mother Bethel. That was, for us, it was an open question for several weeks because we knew how much they had going on. And so I think it was an enormous accomplishment for Free School to not just hold the event there, but to actually be embraced by Reverend Calvinists and by members of the congregation, especially for the Friday program. And I think just to talk about, like one other thing, which was not the program, but the reader that we had put together. That was actually Reverend Calvinist's suggestion to create that booklet. And Emily or Nuri worked a lot on that. And so actually, I don't know, people may not have seen, but on Free School's website, we put together a web page that has what we think are the most important speeches and writings by King. Speeches, many of which were included in the kind of original, the script of the narrative. And also it has our timeline of our version of a timeline of the Black Freedom Movement through King's life. And when we were preparing that reader and kind of trying to work it out, we initially were like, oh, should we include multiple speeches in the printout? And then we decided to focus on Beyond Vietnam and the entirety of Beyond Vietnam, which I think was a very important choice. And then to also pair it with the declaration that we had written as well. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the panel and kind of our thinking going into that panel, because it was something that we talked about a lot. We spent a lot of time in our planning meetings talking about how do we approach this? What's the best way to do it? How do we, like, what do we even want to say? And the way that I had originally thought about the purpose of the panel, which I think maybe others saw slightly differently, was I really felt like we were trying to win people over to King, and more specifically, to win people over to the Third American Revolution as the kind of starting point, the inheritance, the starting point for any conceivable democratic revolutionary struggle for this time. And I think another way of phrasing that, as we talked about it more, was we also felt like it was important for us in Free School with Reverend Ike to explain ourselves as well. And I think, because, you know, it's an open question of, I don't know how much people will say it explicitly, but sometimes when they encounter Free School, whether it's in our library reading group or at the events or other places, I think it's an open question of, can we in Free School, can we be like inheritors of the Black Freedom Movement, especially if we're not Black? I think it's an important question to take seriously. And I guess my answer, which I think everyone in the panel addressed and spoke about from their own experience and kind of moral conviction, was, do we even have a choice? Is there an alternative? And our assertion is there's not an alternative to what the Black Freedom Movement specifically represents for Americans, for young Americans especially. And I felt like that was a very important contribution of the panel. And an ideological task that I think we're still struggling with and still attempting to kind of work out. And like Emily was saying, for the town hall, I think I have to credit Emily and Kathy and Doc, who had kind of done an initial discussion of the questions for the town hall. And I think the questions that we ended up asking, like I felt kind of built on that initial groundwork that you all had said. And we talked about this actually this past Tuesday at the library reading group, but I wanted to say for myself, what were the assumptions that I had, even as a moderator, going into that town hall? And in particular, the assumptions about the Black church, because Terrence, who's a member of the library reading group at Lucian Blackwell, had kind of raised this point of, oh, the title of the town hall was about renewing the struggle for democracy. And yet you ended up spending most of the time talking about the Black church.
Yeah.
And I think it was a good point. And for me, it actually gets to the heart of, okay, like, well, what do we consider to be the democratic struggle?
Yeah, right.
Both for this time and in general in America, in the American revolutionary process. And I think for me, I feel like it was important to kind of clarify, especially in hindsight, that what we see as the Black church and more largely Black religious institutions is that, and but even more specifically the Black church, is that it was in the end the Black church that produced the Martin Luther King. And I think it's very important to say that specifically, the Black church which produced that quality of revolutionary leadership, even if people like King, like Lawson, had to step back from certain day-to-day responsibilities of caretaking churches, they were still products of that specific institution of Black life, of Black civilization. And I bring that up because I really feel that even with the study of the Taylor Branch book that people have been doing in free school, and also I think the Monday reading group studying Coretta Scott King's autobiography, I really feel that in order to understand the Black freedom movement, the Third American Revolution, at the level of social structure, you have to understand the Black church specifically. The Black church is what created the possibility of the social structuring of the freedom movement itself, I think. And it was also, in addition to that, it was the special quality of King's leadership, King's philosophy, and the kind of cadre around him coming from this institution, from this essentially what is a religious, like quote unquote, religious institution, which gave the Third American Revolution its special quality, its special moral quality that I don't think has really been paralleled by any revolutionary struggle in the world, to be honest. The only closest parallel we have is the Indian freedom struggle, which is obviously that they're drawing from. And I really feel that the ideological framework of nonviolence, of the Black freedom movement, was so shaped by the basically like Black, the Black church, Black people's concepts of God, Black people's concepts of love, of suffering, all of that coming especially from the defeat of Reconstruction. And so for us, we would say that in many ways, this question of the Black church is central to the question of the struggle for democracy, because especially in that time, and I think we can still argue today, although I think things have changed, it is especially those institutions, those people's institutions of especially the church, and increasingly, say, the mosques, the Nation of Islam, which are, I feel like especially for Black people, they are those institutions which are the most accountable to people and most shaped by the people, which is what makes them democratic in the first place. And I think what I found so like important about the town hall discussion is that even if the Black church has evolved, and maybe even if its role in the community has been weakened, for example, that I think what I felt was really positive about the town hall is that we were able to frame even this question of the Black church itself as a democratic question. Yeah. And I think you could tell from the response, not just from the town hall speakers, but from the people who came up to talk, that this question of of the church, of religious institutions, is a question that everyone feels they have a stake in. Everyone felt that, like, whether they felt positively or negatively, and I think that that's important, that we were able to have that back and forth. Everyone felt that they had some kind of skin in the game in terms of, why does this question matter? Does the Black church still live up to King? Does it live up to the mandate of basically the past generation of freedom movements? And I felt like that was very important because it's part of what I feel is the kind of reawakening of the democratic capacity of the people, and the people, let's say, who come to our events. And I think the things that I felt I learned and took away from the conversation were, like Emily said, in the face of the onslaught of an actual counter-revolution that happened in American history, like Emily said, the act of maintaining these churches is itself a revolutionary act and has to be taken seriously. I think that was one of the takeaways that even you had, was maybe we underestimated how much work it takes to maintain these churches. Especially, it's not just the organizational, structural nature of it, but it's even the psychological things that Arthur Sutler talked about. People have been so effed up by, like, I feel like people have never been more effed up by American society. And so to even try to hold together a group of people who are not just ideologically have differences, but even psychologically are trying to even get by, I think that is an enormous feat. And I think it gets to the other thing, which is, different. I think what was really positive is that we learned that different, like, I know this is kind of obvious, but like different churches, different goals. They have different histories, and that's not a negative thing, that's a positive. And I think the question is, can that be taken to the next level of what's needed for today? And I really feel that the thing that stood out to me so much was Reverend Havanus's willingness to be honest. That to me was actually the real highlight of the conversation, because one, that was a conversation in her church, in her sanctuary. We were being welcomed into that church. I think it was, I wasn't sure how she would respond to some of the questions. I was worried that we were pushing too hard and that she would be like, oh, like, why are you attacking me, basically. And I thought it was an enormous credit to her that she didn't take it as an attack on her, and that she took the questions in good faith. And she tried to answer those questions in good faith. And I think that is also, like Neri asked this question about, okay, like, well, how do you understand leadership? And I think it really showed, for someone like Havanus, like, I really appreciate her willingness to be so honest and even vulnerable in a public setting like that. And that's something I've noticed about her style of leadership in the times that we visited Mother Bethel. And I think, I guess, like the larger questions that were raised were, can Black religious institutions, are they still capable of producing that type of revolutionary leadership? What is the role of, frankly, an organization like the Saturday Free School? I think it was really important that she was so open and being like, I want you guys to be here. I want, she was like, I haven't, especially because the war question when it was raised, she's like, I don't have the answers about how to talk about this with my congregation. We need you guys to come and to be part of the education, like basically the education of the congregation and more largely the community. And I felt like that was very important. But she was willing to basically have that kind of humility, basically. Like, I feel like that's a very for me, it's a very powerful example of her leadership. And yet, like the larger question that was raised of, okay, what is the role of a vanguard? What will it look like in this time? I think we were just beginning to scratch the surface of those questions. And I think that in general, just to end that, when King talks about going to the South, he says, because he had options of whether he wanted to stay in the North or go to the South. And he talks about how he went to the South in part because he felt there was a need and a readiness for what he called a new courageous witness in the South. And I really feel that we are attempting to kind of live up to that, but I think that we're really in a city where there is a need and a readiness with whoever wants to basically be part of this conversation of, a need for a new courageous witness. And my kind of concluding thought is, we said multiple times throughout the event that it was dedicated to those 168 martyred children in Minab. And I think my overall feelings coming out of this is that for everything that we achieved, and I think it's important to recognize what we did achieve, because I can also get sometimes a little bit pessimistic at times. We're just like, kind of in my own feelings about it. I think in general, I think part of it is because I never really feel like we can be satisfied.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to say that we can't be satisfied, because I'm not personally going to be satisfied so long as it's possible for our country, our government to commit those kinds of atrocities, whether here in society, in American society, or in the world. And I'm not going to be satisfied until basically peace is the actual defining, like peace and democracy are the defining traits of the society that we live in. And I just want to say that as like kind of my ending thing of like, I can't, no matter how much we feel like we have achieved, which I think is a lot, like I come out of these events feeling like, okay, like we can do more. And like that is the kind of moral responsibility that I think each of us has to try to basically deal with and grapple with like every week, every day. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this question of like political urgency is a big thing where I feel like things have really accelerated this year and in the last few years, both the actual crisis of American society and the world. And then I feel like what kind of keeps me up at night is the absence of a people's movement, which I feel like we talk about constantly. Like we talk about it in Lucian Blackwell, like in Free School all the time, where it's like, what, like the conditions seem like they're right, but what is preventing, or why is there not already something? And I feel like in whatever way, like basically our role is to try to bridge that gap or to make it more possible for there to be a movement. And I think partially, I think it is very meaningful that so many people came to Friday and stayed for all of it, because I think it does reflect basically a hunger to not just be like isolated or to feel pessimistic, but to actually feel connected to something bigger and to feel, I think, fundamentally like even a sense of like possibility or optimism that something is possible. And I feel like in some ways my question is like, okay, like Jeremiah said, like, can there be more? Like, how can we have more though? And even though we've basically been doing these events on King for literally like years, like the event at the Unitarian, and I feel like each time we're like, oh, like we should do more, or like, oh, like it wasn't enough, or like, oh, like, yes, like it is meaningful to commemorate the assassination. It's memorable and it's important to share the Beyond Vietnam speech and to make sure that basically it's a part of the consciousness of the people. But then at the same time, somehow I never feel completely satisfied of like, do we know King enough? Like, have we shared enough? Because I guess I just fundamentally believe that if the American people did know King, like if we knew him to the full extent that we need to, then we would not be in the situation that we're actually in. So I feel like I kind of had like mixed feelings, but I just agree with a lot of the points that Emily and Jeremiah were making, which is that Mother Bethel, that relationship, the trust that we've built. And I also think that Mother Bethel reflects something about the democratic capacity of the people very much, because one thing is that we were basically entering into an existing institution, and how, like, even just logistically, I think how solid Mother Bethel is of like providing refreshments, having a dedicated staff, like having a space, feeling welcoming, I think actually did do something for the level of conversation that we were able to have, like in the town hall. For instance, like Calvinist actually was holding something down. And I think that even the back and forth and the question and answer, like even though a lot of it was like, there were clear answers, there clearly were like not complete agreements, but I feel like the way in which everybody was asking those questions, I feel like fundamentally reflected an assumption, which is that any critique of the Black church is not to say like, oh, like throw it away, it's so stupid, like it's done. The critique has to be made because it's actually coming from a place of, we know how historically important it's been. What does it mean that this church or this institution is not playing the role that it has played or could play in this time? And yeah, I just think that there was a certain level of like conversation and I think readiness, where maybe it was like the priming of like the Friday evening, but I think just this recognition broadly that like we're in a crisis, yes. And we're also past just, I think, complaining about it or saying like, oh, it's so bad, but we actually want to find solutions. I think that that was pretty meaningful. But I think back to my question still, which is how do we make King speak for this time? And for the people, where I think we're trying it in various ways. Yeah. And I agree that actually listening to those clips, playing them, and integrating it in, not just as like a historical speech, but basically integrating it into the present questions that it answers is important. And I think something that was pretty new and significant is King and Philly in the North, where in the past, we like when we did the event at the Unitarian Church, we had made a big deal about like the fact that it was King who had listened to Mordecai Johnson and discovering nonviolence in that Unitarian Church. And I think that that was meaningful. But I think uncovering the actual concrete links to King and Shepherd, or even asking what was the relationship to those ministers? What was the state of the Black freedom movement in Philadelphia itself? What points were mostly compatible or very resonant with the movement in the South? And what was unique and distinct? And I think Art saying that basically Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, there is a unique history that started even before King and is part of the same Black freedom movement, has the same question of basically like Black governance. What are the values? Who is God? What is sacred? But is not all like basically it's a single garment of destiny, but it's not just King. I feel like there's a lot more to think about and to work out there because I don't think any of us really knew Art before, but I thought besides you. But I feel like it was really impressive. I think the depth of the history, but not just how he was reciting the history, but how he was actually like frankly basically applying it for this time. And I also learned a lot about like the AME, like the Episcopalian, Mother Bethel. Like I think that there's a lot. Like the Baptist. And just this. I do think that there's something about the social organization of the Black church, and specifically like with Philadelphia, that I feel like we've been concerned by or like interested in for a while, like whether it's like Zion, Mother Bethel, now like Mount Olivet, St. Thomas. And I feel like we also still have a lot of questions, which are, what actually is the state of those like social institutions? Who is involved in it? How do they think of it? And also how are the people who are the leaders of that church like actually seeking to lead it in this very difficult time? And so I just think that it was important that we were able to have that kind of high level and like Jeremiah and Emily were saying, that kind of honest and vulnerable discussion, where I think what that shows to me is that actually we are very much a part of the struggle. And in a lot of ways, we have become more and more like organic to it. We do belong to it in a way that it's natural to actually have those conversations about like what is the future of these institutions? What is the future of the democratic struggle? And I think the other thing was in the relationship with Mother Bethel and with Calvinists, and like how quickly basically this relationship has developed, and Calvinists also talking about how she sees us, where this thing of there's a responsibility and accountability to a specific congregation. And Calvinist obviously is a leader who's actually involved in governing the church.
Yes.
And the thing is that that has both its, I guess, like weaknesses or challenges in that she's consumed by like all of the day-to-day maintenance, all of the day-to-day checking in with people, all of the boards, all of the ministries. But also I feel like that is a reality of like governance. And I think that we have certain strengths and we also have certain weaknesses and challenges too, where we're very focused on the ideas. And I think we're also learning more about like the governance and the level of even like doing these events. But I think that conversation where she was like, I want to learn more, like I need to be educated, I want to be educated. I think that that's an important thread. Like even, yeah, like when she had brought up wanting the King reader, I took that pretty seriously. Like I wasn't in that meeting, but when she was like, oh, she wants to read, I was like, that's deep. That's actually so important, where we have an opportunity to actually frame and to shape like this is King and this is how we see him. And this is what we think is the most important to learn about him. And thinking like, how can we actually get that to people like day of, but also longer term, where even if people were not necessarily present for the morning panel, like they have the reader, they know that we're there. And I hope that we can do more of that in the future. But I mean, because basically with the reader, like I was like, okay, like we'll just print it on our own, on our like little work printers, and then staple it and fold it on our own. And then she was like, oh, like I think we can print it. So we didn't actually pay for any of the printing, and they printed 100 copies, and then all of those copies were gone on Friday night. So we printed more, like 50 more. And so I just think that there is actually a hunger to know King better, and our role is to actually shape who is this King. And I feel like we also have a ways to go in understanding him. And yeah, like every time we basically trace the contours of his life, I feel like there actually is more. Like constant pillars that I feel like all of us basically do live our lives around, whether it's like the single garment of destiny, the beloved community that Catherine talks a lot about, the triple evils. Like I think those are basically touchstones that are very intuitively or instinctively significant to many people, but I still think that in some ways that's what we hang on to, and there's still more. Like in Lawson, in like all of the speeches that we keep digging through. And yeah, I just think that there's a lot that we have done, but still, yeah, I don't feel completely satisfied.
I agree with a lot of what's been said, and I also really appreciate the way the conversation has been laid out. Sure, in terms of how we were even conceptualizing original aspects of the program, and especially this idea of bringing King to the present in new and creative ways. I think just the way that was laid out specifically was really useful. I think, for example, this point, Jeremiah, you had highlighted about everybody feeling a stake in the Black church, and that being a very rich democratic conversation in terms of the people who are in the town hall, but also the audience. And then I also want to bring up how rich and vibrant the conversation was at Lucian Blackwell on Tuesday.
Yes.
Because we meet every week to read The Ordeal of Mansart, but naturally that conversation ended up being our assessment of the event, and pretty unanimously, many people were struck by that conversation, that discussion of the town hall. And it was a concrete entry point for almost all the members of the Lucian Blackwell reading group to ask, what is our task? Like what, how will the youth be moved? How will we, how will we find our way to the future as a people? So I thought that was really significant. But then I think the way that you laid out the narrative again is also very useful. And even some specific points that you had highlighted, like how we can't lose sight of just our unique voice in believing so much in the single garment of destiny, that really it is the Kingian ideals that have, just that we embody so much at our best in free school. like the World House, the beloved community, and never forgetting that free school is, I mean, we embody that civilizational belt or that civilizational bridge that Lawson talks about, that formulation that we were so compelled by when Jeremiah had brought it up a few months ago. I also think like just some personal reflections from that Friday. I felt a lot of confidence from it in the sense that I feel that free school has really become a home in the city for like men and women of goodwill, or like, I feel like that's a phrase that King would also say. But at this point, in the way that we present ourselves to the people, I don't even, for example, feel very self-conscious about being Asian anymore. And I think that's a testament to how kind of like Nuri is saying, we've just grown a lot more in lockstep, I think, with who we identify as the agents of progressive social change in this country, the Black institutions and Black people. And I just think that feeling of us being a home, like for people who are interested in revolutionary change, felt really real, even though we don't necessarily have a physical home, like we're not a church. It is free school bringing King's voice to this moment that can stitch back together. I mean, I think it's deep that different congregations of different mosques in the Nation of Islam are allowing themselves to encounter each other again through free school, and not through a Nation of Islam event. And I don't take that for granted. Same with the artists, same with the youth, same with the different churches as well, which we also saw in dialogue on the second day. I also think this idea that we keep emphasizing about the revolutionary core has also been clarifying for me, and to identify ourselves as a revolutionary core, because like, I just think some of the history you were sharing about SCLC, and even the way that King grappled with the turning point in 1967 was really useful. And in your presentation on the second day panel, when you had essentially addressed the question of what halts today the creation of an organic revolutionary core, that organic gathering of the talented 10 or the gifted 100, who become the natural leading edge of social transformation. I just think it's very useful for me in continuing to understand who we are as free school and who we're headed. Where we're headed, and how we are essentially making it more and more possible for many soldiers of revolutionary change to be resurrected. And like, that is our unique contribution as a revolutionary core that, I almost get like an image of like concentric circles, like a ripple, like a drop in a pond, and then all these ripples coming out, of just making it more and more possible for any ordinary person to identify the revolutionary task and then to become an instrument in achieving it. I also like the point that you had brought up, Jeremiah, about considering even the contents that would go in the reader, looking back over many of the speeches that King had given, and in the end deciding that we should print the Vietnam War speech in full. And this is something that Nuri, Jeremiah, and Emily, like you guys all highlighted, but I do agree that we must return to King in, in a childlike way over and over in our process of rediscovery, but to become more and more careful and more methodical and more purified in our understanding and our embodiment of him. Because something that I also have thought a lot about, and this is the point that Doc, I think, had emphasized in our planning for the event, is that this is an event that is situated within the 250th. And in some ways it was our inaugural event of the year of the 250th for free school, but it's also why Doc insisted that the declaration be read on both days. And in terms of free school carrying the spirit of the true meaning of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. Like, I just feel like we have spent a lot of energy on that in the last few months. And something I remember Doc emphasizing a lot is how much this is right up free school's alley. To pierce how much this is up free school's alley to pierce directly into the existential questions of this moment. The question of democracy, the question of war and peace, the question of governance, the question of how the crisis will be resolved, the question of what is the battle of the civilizations today. And I say that because I think it's a testament to a certain discovery for us that I think King and Lawson especially have really just naturally like become our lodestones in this year of really deploying a vision that can work for all of the American people in the 250th. Like this idea of a hypothesis being tested that Emily and Jeremiah, you had brought up, I even feel that as a member of Free School, like I was won over in a certain way. And I became convinced that this is where we need to go in our activity for the rest of the year. Like just one more thing I wanted to add is this is also something that we talked a lot about like coming into the event, but our rediscovery of James Lawson as the tactician, the theoretician, and the strategist of the Black freedom movement, and how we first encountered him as a man 7 years ago now in Free School in 2019 during the year of Gandhi. And like we have already said this a couple of times, but he was really obsessed with the question of political strategy into the latest years of his life. And just a few years before he passed in 2024, unlike King and unlike Gandhi, this is his unique contribution. He was really trying to categorize nonviolence as a political strategy. And he created new language to describe how a nonviolent campaign or movement might be mounted in the 21st century. And something that I had said at that time is that increasingly I see even Free School as our political tradition as working in the nonviolent tradition, where we spend very careful attention in accurately diagnosing the actual problem, actually knowing reality and understanding reality so that we do not act hastily in our effort to change reality. And Lawson would agree that he says this with the Nashville campaigns, but I think that he would identify that as one of the most important stages of nonviolent revolutionary struggle. He calls it investigation.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say, like, reflecting on that, I felt that if Lawson, like, if we could meet him again in this moment 7 years later, I feel that he would be very, like, proud of how we've grown as a group. And something that Doc had said.
Michelle, who are you speaking about?
James Lawson.
Benson?
James Lawson, yeah, who worked very closely with King. And this is something that Doc and I had talked a little bit about a week ago. That, like, Doc was basically speculating how Lawson saw us in 2019. And I think that kinging of the ideal of the single garment of destiny was very natural to him. So I don't think it necessarily was difficult for him to conceive that this was, there were many young Asians in this group. I don't think that was difficult for him to confront, but I just think he would be, that like he really walks with us into the 21st century. And I feel that very concretely after this event.
I know I was very moved by the event. I was moved by it because I remember all of the work that went into it. And of course, Emily putting together a revolutionary narrative, a narrative of sacrifice and freedom and struggle. I think it came across well. And I know Emily, although she forgets, when the night before, I think it was the night before Emily came over and we were working on certain formulations in the narrative, and she was most concerned with how it would be received by the people. And I said, well, we don't know, we'll have to see. And I think the proof was in the pudding. it was received by the audience very well. Now, I hasten to add that that audience represented the most advanced forces, among the most advanced forces of the Black community in Philadelphia. I agree with you, Jerry. It could be held at Mother Bethel and not at the First Unitarian Church, or maybe not even at St. Thomas's. I'm not quite certain about that. But Mother Bethel, under the leadership of Reverend Cavanis and that great congregation, seems to be special. But nonetheless, the narrative of the first night had the full and enthusiastic support of that audience. But not only of the audience, of the people involved in it, including the Stylistics Review, who brought their families. And I learned that the lead singer, that was his sister and his niece, who were recording all of that evening, the whole thing, not just the Stylistics, on their phones. And of course, Bobby Zankel, who I think that whole group, but Bobby Zankel represents the most advanced consciousness among musicians, jazz or otherwise, in the city of Philadelphia. I mean, we just have to say it. He is the most advanced. And like Terrence told me from the Lucian Blackwell Library Reading Group, because he's always in a shell, sometimes you can barely hear him speaking. And I said, we were walking, y'all recognize, we were walking to the bus after the reading group. And I said, man, it looked like you done come out of your shell. And he said he had. And because even at the reading group, he's speaking louder. You can hear him suddenly, And he said he had come out of his shell. And I said, but it represented that he saw hope. And he was really moved by Bobby and in particular Sumi. He's a jazz man. He knew what Sumi was doing. But yeah, I was it was a formulation that Eddie made some weeks ago, resolution that is not a synthesis. I don't know how, if I'm applying it, but I know that for free school, for us, we reached another level of resolution. We are finding ways to bring our voice and our ideas closer to those of the masses of people. And it is true, I agree with everyone that says that it cannot be done except through the religious institutions of Black people. Now, there can be other organizational forms and mechanisms, community organizations, political organizations, even union organizations, although I tend to have lost a lot of hope in unions because of and this gets to the question that Jeremiah and I think Nuri and others were raising. The quality of leadership in the Black church still is higher than the quality of leadership in any other institutions. And I think Reverend Cavanis, in that, just very vulnerable moment where she talked about the difficulties of running a church, of paying the bills, keeping the lights on, and dealing with the multiple needs of human beings. And when Arthur Sudler said, church is a schizophrenic, we're not of one mind. And we just can't jump so far out in front of the people that we lose them. We have to minister to them. So I thought all of that, but I feel for myself and for free school that this event was among the best that we have done. I felt that we all grew. And I think that this 250th anniversary and our concept, there's so many pregnant ideas in that declaration. And I like the type of purpose and resistance. I like it because it speaks to what young people must arrive to, a life of purpose and resistance, and it's, when you say purpose, you're talking about something more existential, something more long-term, not just a demonstration or going to a event, but a deeper understanding of what is my purpose. And that is what free school represents in the young people in free school. Young people with an elevated sense of purpose. And then to defy all of the, quote, radical talk and to say, no, this purpose must be grounded in Martin Luther King Jr. And then to say, and we're going to show you how it's done. This is huge to me. And to say that the 250th means nothing except if it is contextualized as a dialogue between King and Jefferson, where King is the future. I think this is so important. I think we can do more to, to tease that out. I just want to see. This is such a great learning process. I was listening to the whole interview that Blaze and Jerry and Albert did with Apostle Crawford. It's amazing. And he's an amazing human being, by the way. But Martin Luther King defines his engagement with the 21st century, really. I wouldn't say it to him like that, but I think everything resolved back to King. And he came up in the era of the civil rights movement, but everything, he talked about Sweet Daddy Grace, he talked about Bishop McCullough, he talked about, all of the bishops. But then King occupied a special and elevated place. I'm of the opinion that our interview with Ishmael Mohammed, when we talked about a third resurrection, although, the language of the Nation of Islam is, because King is easier for the church because of Christian love and yada, 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 than it is for the Nation of Islam, who comes out of a different discourse, But I felt in the interview with Ishmael that a new resolution, a third resurrection, would be precisely on the foundations of Martin Luther King. Not negating anything else in their history, just like with Apostle Crawford, not negating their history, not negating the great work. But then if there's a future way to see this country, it is King. And I think that is the overriding or prevailing concept for us for this time, and that is what we have learned. I have learned that there is no discussion with Black folk that is not about King. If you want to have that discussion, well, you're talking to yourself. If you want to talk to Black people seriously about struggle and revolution, it is tied to Martin Luther King Jr. You know, and I could see that, and I was so happy the way you integrated the voice of King into the narrative of other voices. And oh, by the way, in talking about, you know, Mos 35, Mos 12, Mother Bethel, all of that, we cannot overlook families that were there. Because those children were there with their mothers and fathers. You know what I'm saying? And they were there because their mothers, and I know I was so proud of Kayamisha and Naima, her, you know, a mother and daughter, you know, narrating with, along with a professional actor, Carlo, who was all that, by the way. But Kayamisha doing Mamie Till Mobley and being Mamie Till Mobley was, and so I felt those families, that mothers and fathers felt comfortable bringing their daughters to this event. That it was not, even though, you know, it was so clearly about a revolutionary narrative, parents didn't feel they were bringing or coming or bringing their children to something where there would be dangerous and hurtful rhetoric. And I think that is a positive, but I think, you know, I'm just smiling because that narrative impacted a lot of people in all different kinds of ways. For example, a good friend of mine is Mo Africa. He's a longtime member of the MOVE organization. He came and he called me. He said, Tony, I did not know about Richard Allen. See, we kind of grew up in the same neighborhood around Richard Allen projects, but he did not know of Richard Allen. And he thanked me. Now, this is a MOVE member. You know what I'm saying? My last point is this. You know, a lot of times there were people who tried to trivialize what we're doing. Oh, that's just, you know, people holding programs. We, of course, see all of this as a part of the political education of the people, which it is. We see what we do as organically connected to the people. But I would just say something more. What we're doing is a necessity. In the world struggle and in the struggle for Black people, our concept, it's in the declaration, it's in the narrative, it's in the whole panel and the town hall, that to square the circle of nonviolence and revolution, we have to work it out in the terms that we're trying to do it. Is nonviolence, or can nonviolence be an instrument of revolutionary change in this country? I think the case, we made the case partially last weekend, especially in light of what looks like the possibility of regime collapse, which we have talked about. What is to be done? And that is Cavanagh's question. What is to be done if the government collapses, if the weight of war and the failure, the narcissism of the top leaders of the country, if all of that so becomes such a weight that the system cannot sustain or reproduce itself, then what do the people do? And this is what we're struggling for. I know I, along with Michelle and Kathy, are reading Lawson's autobiography. I recommend it to everybody. And he was thinking about the same things that we're thinking about. In fact, I remember when he came here, he knew of Henry Winston's work. And I see the two of them as working to resolve or square the same circle that we're working on. But I think, not to be arrogant about it, I think we are closer to resolving the question that the two of them were working on. And that is a question of burning significance for the masses of American people, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic. The American people want to know, is there a path to freedom that does not involve a civil war or violent destruction of the country? Is it possible? And we have to always, whether it happens the way we want it to happen, the option of the nonviolent revolutionary transformation of the country, that option must be given to the people. We are not revolutionaries by talking about the only path is a violent revolution and the smashing of the state and all of those slogans. The option of a nonviolent transformation in a predominantly Christian nation that has lived under a, quote, liberal bourgeois democracy, which has not brought them freedom. So these questions are just everywhere. And I think we are right to say to the nation, these are questions that have been thought about. You see them and their struggle, you cannot see your own way to freedom. Yes, that's.
As usual, I got to get my act together for tomorrow morning, but a couple of things crossed my mind. One, I think this is in response to what Reverend Kaepernick said about the hassles of running a black church. It's just an idea. I just put it out on the table. I wonder if there's any possibility of putting together some kind of mechanism that could provide some support for churches in terms of some of the, I was about to use the word crap, in terms of just some of the crud that you got to struggle with in a church. And I don't mean pastoral issues. I mean helping keeping up with what the financial situation is about. At a place like the Advocate, as old as the Dickens, the need to raise money constantly to keep the doggone roof from coming in on you or something like that. My gut tells me that with the case to be made that there is hope for all of us that's found in those churches, that you can solicit funding from a whole lot of broader people who look at a guy like what Trump is about and say, I'll put my money on anything that would support an alternative to what we see going on right now. I mean, that's just my personal thinking. My personal experience has been that when the Advocate had that kind of administrative, backup, it was certainly a lot easier on me to be involved in other stuff with a sense of I don't know what, it's not hanging over you all the time. Here's one more thing. I think it's incredibly important, whatever free school does, is to keep open opportunities for real, live, regular people to be involved. You understand what I mean? And in other words, the name of the game becomes, what can I do? You know, what can I do? My illustration on that one is the bus boycott in Birmingham and in Montgomery versus the Supreme Court decision the year before. What do you do if you ain't Thurgood Marshall? To give you a sense of your own agency, your own kind of power, your own ability to participate in this kind of struggle. I just think that that's vitally important. The advocate was involved in building 140 homes, 46 in Market Street, what do you call it, Nehemiah Project. And a woman from the advocate and Ed Rendell were the people who were going to be on the tractor to, what do you call it, dark things, you know, to break the ground. And Mary Higgs, when Rendell comes over to join her on the tractor, Mary Higgs tells Rendell, you think all these people are here to see you. They're here to see me. You understand? That gives her a sense of some kind of power and agency as a human being in something that's bigger. I just think that's vitally important. I just said one more thing. Leadership in Black churches is very important. And I called Art Sutler to thank him for his part in the situation because I've known him. I served at St. Thomas when he was there. And one of the comments that he made was just going to other churches where issues in relationship to justice, etc., get some time. And he was saying that doesn't happen as much as I would like to see at St. Thomas.
Say that one more time, Ike. What doesn't happen as much as he'd like to see it?
Please don't, I mean, I hope this doesn't have to get repeated.
Yeah, right.
That he doesn't hear issues of justice raised as much as he would like, even at St. Thomas. And that's just my way of saying that this business of leadership at these churches is incredibly important. I think that's all I have. I'm sorry I couldn't stay all of Friday night, but I was so exhausted that I just couldn't hang. But it was impressive, and I hope there can be some kind of follow-up to that town hall meeting. I just thought that was.
I thought it was a great meeting.
Yeah. Anyway, I gotta get.
You know what? I'm so impressed. I haven't been coming to the meetings long. I feel like I'm a member, but I know I'm not prompted to like to be. But I'm so impressed with this whole group. Why can't we sponsor some kind of one of us? Not me. I serve that. I'm too old for that. Somebody to run for office, and we can all get behind. Everybody around here is better than Trump's flunkies.
That's the
And
point.
Trump, everybody that I listen to, one person more intelligent than all of Trump's flunkies, including, of course, he's a moron. Why can't we get saying your head no, Tony? Is that not true?
No, because you see, we have to be clear on what our purpose and mission is.
Okay.
And ours is to work at the deep structure of society, at the deep structure, the civilizational, in other words, to unite the people on a foundation that is deeper and more permanent than an election.
We couldn't do both?
No, we don't have,
Work inside?
pardon
I
me?
guess that would, one of you folks working inside? It's not easy.
No, because we would get, yes, I think,
Too clean.
yeah, I think we can first of all, I don't think we should underestimate the magnitude of the crisis of governance.
Okay.
That the city council does not govern the city. More powerful financial and hospitals and universities have more to say about running the city. And these politicians are mainly in it for themselves. But yeah, but we have to keep doing what we're doing. We have to know what we're about. We have to be confident in our identity. In a lot of ways, I think Emily or somebody said, we are more like our model, the way I think the way we see ourselves is more like SCLC than the political, or even a church. We couldn't be a church. We couldn't set up a free school church because, you know, but we're more like Kevin has said, you all can help me to answer some of these questions. I'm certain that Art Sutler would say something similar. I am certain that the new pastor at Zion Baptist Church, you know, would say something similar. I can see even in Mosque 12 and 20 and 35, help us to see this broader world.
Yes.
You know, so I think there is a role for a group like ours that is a unique role that only we are playing. Now, the other thing is the outreach to young people, and that's something we got to work on more. I mean, we're working. That's a difficult nut to crack right now. So we have to continue doing this, who we are. Don't take us where we're not. Don't make us something we're not. And that's what destroys a lot of great organizations, trying to be everything to everybody all the time. Oh, go ahead, John.
What I took away was that the urgency is now, and that we can't wait for the church. And I think we have to have a new consciousness with changed heart and mind, because you can't change without your heart changing. We are no longer victims. So we have to take it upon ourselves to free ourselves with changed hearts and minds to make a difference. And we have to be able to see a future and have hope that the impossible will be possible. And we have to let go a lot of those old thoughts that don't work anymore. And we can't expect to do the same thing and expect a different outcome. So we have to have a different outlook and a different change to make a difference.
I don't have a whole lot to add, but as somebody who was also just part of some of the conversations building up to this event, and something I just wanted to lift up also from our plan, that's something that actually John you had said, but actually also your point earlier about putting the nonviolent option on the table for the American people in this time of crisis when civil war, World War is so present, is also that I think what was a big influence on us, even the reason why we titled it Freedom and Sacrifice, is because I think we were very moved by the concept of martyrdom, and like that notion that I think it was partially very much a direct response to the way in which the Iranian people have also been responding in this war and this genocidal assault.
but also, of course, even the Palestinian people for the past 2 years and what it means to struggle and give one's lives to something greater than oneself. But also, it's the mirror for the American people to ask, like, what will it take for the American people to sacrifice and struggle, and in the way that they had done with the Third American Revolution had prepared so many people, especially King as a martyr, but especially even the Revolutionary Corps that we still look up to, what it meant for and trained by Lawson, trained to be able to face death or face struggle and spiritually prepare for that kind of fight in that kind of way in which you might have to lay down your life. And like the question really is for the American people, and I think this is like such a big part of what the event strove to do, is that the people cannot, people are, people must know what they are ready to fight for and ready to die for. And until that is made clear, which it is, not always clear, and especially in so much confusion. I mean, I'm reflecting on what we were saying about, the counter-revolution in the past few decades almost being like an atom bomb being dropped upon the American people, and the moral remaking and reconstruction of their capacity and their consciousness. Like that must be undertaken, but it is not one that, is so readily, like that is the struggle that we have to take up. And it's not so readily what meets the eye, but actually that is what makes it really challenging today. And that is why I think our event had focused so much on what it meant to, prepare people not to struggle for, people are very much, not able to, do not want to sacrifice for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
They don't want to sacrifice for something that doesn't speak to them. They don't want to, they do not want to undertake hasty actions, or, with the political urgency of now being so on people's minds, and there's been such a desire to do something, such a desire to want to do, and so many people do look for, either shortcuts or something immediate or even extreme acts.
Yes.
But at the same time, what actually fulfills the moral imperative. And so actually going back to King and actually looking at what it means to have such an incisive explanation for the evil of American society, of white supremacy, of war, of militarism, of poverty, of racism. That is actually, I think, what I think we're trying to reawaken, or this capacity. I think that those submerged, I think, would come out if given the opportunity and a chance. And I think that's what really heartens me when I reflect on the 2 days of the event and what, the response of the people to the 2 days. And I was even thinking, actually, I ran into Gloria after the event on the train. It was a very spontaneous, and we were both heading towards West Philly. And I was thinking, she's one of the young people who was part of the narrative at the very beginning, asking those questions. I discovered, she's normally very quiet in the meetings at Lucian Blackwell. She's usually coming from Temple, where she has a very heavy load of engineering courses, but she can really tell, she came alive after that event and telling me, actually, it's so wrong that, my generation has not been taught King properly, the way King has been given to me in, in Temple, or to, say, Black students and Black student groups, is a crime, really. I think it, and for me, King is a revolutionary. This actually, there is something very insidious about taking young people away, and especially even Black students, away from the real revolutionary essence of King. And what Free School has done is to actually really elevate that in a way that no university has been able to do, and especially Temple University. And that was one of the responses I was really reflecting on. And then in addition, I wanted to mention that I had invited a couple people who were artists, very spontaneously I had met, But in many ways, one, James Brantley, like a painter who actually has work actually in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, went to school with Richard Watson. And he had come because we had just run into him when I was with Alfie at the Philadelphia Art Museum. He had stayed and like sat in the front row and really, really enjoyed it. And then also, yeah.
Omar got in his face.
Yes, I think so. And then the director of the Marian Anderson Historical Society was very spontaneous. I had run into her as part of a work event. And I had asked, like, if you want to meet me, because the only time I'm free on Friday is going to be at Mother Bethel. That's where you can find me, but you should feel free to stay for the program. She stayed for both days. And so that's how that happened. I think it just goes into the larger thing that I think, you know, going back to this idea of a testable hypothesis, like when actually the call to respond to King or to these ideas or to this question of nonviolence or ways to talk about these urgent existential political ideological questions of our time and our future and our children, like when that is put out, I think that people really, really come out and really want to find a place to work these things out, to come together, to know what others are thinking or rediscover themselves and each other on that basis. And I think that I'm really, it's going to take some time to really assess like how this event really has seeped into, I think, fully into the fabric of the city, into the people, but I think we can already get a good sense that it has, made impacts in ways that we haven't yet even fully grasped yet.
At the beginning of planning for the year, Jeremiah said something that has really stuck with me, which is that in the country's celebration of the 250th planning, a lot of it speaks to a city and a nation that doesn't exist. Meaning there's this, either it's historical of the founding fathers, or historical telling of what happened in the past, or it's a projection of what society is actually is. And whether it's like cleaning up certain areas of Philadelphia to be like, this is the beacon of the nation, so on and so forth. And that really stuck with me because I think part of the explicit or inexplicit goal, whether for the free school or myself, is that how do we put forward a narrative that actually speaks to the people living in this city and actually living in this country? What are their fears and also strivings? And what are they worried about? What are they thinking about in the world? And I think a lot of what was like various panelists, speakers of the 2 days were able to do is speak to problems that people were facing. And not as singular problems of there's like economic violence or there's war, but that all of these problems are connected and part of that deep structure that you were speaking to. And for people to see themselves as not just victims, but also as part of like a path to how do you actually address these individual problems that you see in society that often come across as schizophrenic. I think people, because there's so much weighing down on children, on adults, like everyone in society, that sometimes it's even hard to understand what is it that you're going through and how is it connected to other individuals and what is happening in society. And I think that was a case that I thought was actually really strong on the panel, where Michelle, you talked about your experiences growing up in the society and going through Penn and going through an educational system that did not speak to young people and their values. And or Blaise talking about how young people, oftentimes there is a sense of justice, and slowly growing up in the society, you're distorted. You're made to think, oh, actually, for me to live in the society, my values have to change. They have to become unjust or immune to justice or immune to the wrongs of the society. And I think because we talk about it so much in free school every Saturday, I think sometimes we think like, oh, like this is something that should be happening, or this discourse should be happening everywhere, or people. But the thing I think that we realize from these events is that for the most part, there aren't places for people to actually talk about how the problems of society and the ones that are weighing down on them are making them feel pessimistic and hopeless and isolated. And I think those are the headwinds that oftentimes with our events, with free schools events that we're facing, which is that people, there's a lot for people to even get to the doors of of free school. And so I think that just to speak to the point that Doc, you were making earlier, which is that those who do make it are the most advanced of the people.
That's a good way to.
The ones that are still, that despite everything weighing down, they're seeking, they're looking for something. They're looking for something that gives them hope that there can be change and that something can be done about this deep problem in society that everyone is feeling, but they have no way to go about it. And I think, I know as people were talking about the panel after the event, people were kind of harsh, but as I was like re-listening to it, I realized actually there's so much in there that I was like, oh shoot, like I don't think we're fully there yet in terms of, for example, this question of nonviolence, like what does that mean as a revolutionary strategy in this time? But I think we touched upon a lot that we'll further explore in the year. And I think Emily talked about Diane Nash and King and being part, I think it was 19 that she moves to Fisk and is encountering all these problems, which is that, I guess what we were talking about before, which is that young people growing up in the society, suddenly you're told you can't do this or you can't do that, or this thing is right, but you shouldn't do it. But how does a group of people, including young people, gain the courage and avenues where she finds Lawson's workshop and this is the place where I can try to figure out a way in which to change society. And I think that's what people were responding to as well, both days, which is that for those that are beaten down by life, they saw something in those 2 days that were both represented in the ideas, but also the community of people that came together, where it's the first time where people are coming together seriously. There's not BS about, it's not just socializing. We're actually here to talk about what is happening in society and what is the path forward. And in that, people found something that where, the free school is realistic about how much is weighing down on people, but we're also not patronizing. Patronizing in the sense that these ideas are challenging because they're so new. It's not taught in schools, in general discourse. And, where I think we talk about agents of change among the people, but it's also that we believe that there are thinkers among the people that can make sense of this crisis and formulate a strategy forward. And it does, and I think that is also a long battle that the free school has been in, which is to recognizing this counter-revolution, this dumbing down of people that intentionally happens in society, and to raise the discourse to a higher standard. And I think people felt that. Whether they're able to express that or not, people stayed, or people said, like Emily was saying, like, this should happen every Friday. Or do you guys do this like every Friday? And oh shoot. Oh, and then this conversation about like, what is the free school? What is the relationship to institutions among the people in the city? And I think to your question, John, I was thinking about it too, like and I think that's something that happened in the town hall, which is this question of what are the institutions of the people and what are the capacities of these institutions? Or why is it that we even reach out to institutions rather than solely individual? Or why is it both a strategy of, like whoever comes across the free school as an individual is welcome, but at the same time, our strategy is to work to build relationships with those institutions that finding those institutions among the people and are organic to the people, because there is a level of shared values, a history, like such as Mother Bethel, which is that those that go to Mother Bethel see I believe, a history or a legacy to Mother Bethel that they see worth preserving. And there's a leadership and organization to it that is not always present with just individuals. Organizations to mobilize people. Organizations to mobilize people, where Calvinist is seen as a leader, or she is seen as a leader and a respected authority. And so with with the free school, I think a lot of it is that a lot of this is not done like in Philadelphia and others, whether it can tell otherwise of if it's even happening in the nation, which is to address not just individual problems. There are nonprofits out there, whether or not they're succeeding. I think our impression is that they're not, whether it's in gun violence, whether it's in poverty. There is not something that is cohesive and comprehensive and speaks to deep-rooted issues. And so, I think it's a lot that the free school is taking on. But this event really showed that we're capable of doing that through the emphasis of ideas and through an emphasis of a civilizational crisis and the importance of being rooted in the oppressed and the people. And and then just one thing about the town hall. What was interesting is that when Jeremiah, I think, had asked the question of, do we feel that the churches are living to the standards of King?
Yeah.
It was kind of interesting because I think the free school has had different experiences of King as being the standard or King as being the bar to which individuals and institutions that feel responsible to the people should be striving to. But I think on the panel itself, there wasn't that pushback. Instead, it was like, oh, yes, King should be the bar, but is that what we're fulfilling now? And I think ultimately that is one of the questions, which is that as we put King forward, as we put the questions that we're putting forward of Western civilization and the choice between Western civilization or white civilization with humanity, as we put those choices on the table, I think one is even giving those that feel responsible to people that choice to say, oh, wait, that is the standard that we should be working towards. Because I think a lot of, whether it's a lot of institutions of the people don't have that vision or don't have that bar to which they can strive towards. And I guess all this to say is that with the 2 days, as usual with the free school, we have a lot of learnings, but it also pointed to more questions and more work to be done. And I think that's also whether in terms of how to better engage with people, what are the ideas that we have to continue to work out and be able to explain or find the language to who among the people or where among the people can we find those goodwill. I think that was the way that Michelle had put it. Where do we find the goodwill among the people in which we can continue to build? Because it can't just happen with the free school. It can't just be in this room. It has to be those concentric circles that we're starting to see. And maybe we built one concentric circle. We're building additional layers to it.
Could you just say something about the artistic and political renaissance?
Oh. well, we got to work that out.
Yeah.
But essentially, I think coming out of the event, many of us have discussed like the role of art and music in being able to speak to and engage with the people. And how we saw through the event, which is that people were very much engaged when the stylists came up, or Bobby's ankle comes up, or Jamil was dancing. You know, all of these recitations, and that. Like, I think that on the artistic front, and then also in terms of the ideas, I think both give oxygen essentially for people who are artists, who are in the Nation of Islam, so forth. And so when Doc was saying, oh, can you bring up political and artistic renaissance? So we were working with this idea of, okay, how essentially is Philadelphia, because of the free school, going through a political and artistic renaissance?
Yes.
Or is there he believes that we're going through a political and artistic renaissance, which is that big, like, such as like Bobby's ankle, and the wonderful warrior, the full name, you know, like they found a place for their music where jazz is able to be something that's not just the technical, like of course the technical, but also jazz is able to reach an audience where it's not just, you know, your liberal who's into some niche music, but it's actually connected to ideas. And so this idea of a political and artistic renaissance for the city of Philadelphia, for the nation, where there are advancements in art, culture, ideas, and politics.
And the inseparability of art and ideas to the elevation of the consciousness of the people. That art is vital to people's conceptualization of ideas. Is what we call sometimes the Black proletarian imaginary. But Alice and I talked about this, that going forward out of this event last week, could we consciously talk about a renaissance of art and politics in the city of Philadelphia?
Yeah, and I think that really started too with the pageant, on their birthday, or their narrative as well, because there's something about art and music that allows people or advances the consciousness of people.
Yes.
And I think part of it also comes from the conversation, which is that I think it's odd for some people, like especially older folks, to see that the free schools consist of younger people who are into Marvin Gaye or the stylistics. Because I think the common refrain is like, oh, that's from young people, that's old people music. That's from another generation. And so the question of why is it that these young people are seeing something universal in this quote unquote old music? Maybe this old music is saying something about this time and the questions of young people.
And that's the Renaissance.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
But yeah, I think it really was started with this idea of the pageant, the narrative, and how people are responding to these recitations, these musical performances. And I think part of where I see it is that we need to be better at explaining why this art and music is important. Like, why is jazz so important?
And even to frame it as a oh, sweetie.
What?
Yes. She's so sweet. No, this, Alice and I were talking about this the other night, and this is where, we came up with the idea, well, are we in the throes of an artistic and political or ideological renaissance in the city? Are we on the threshold, when you say renaissance, rebirth? And that's why when you say, well, why is it that young people in the free school like Marvin Gaye more than they like Drake?
Yeah,
I don't even know if y'all have ever listened to Drake.
I do like Marvin Gaye more than I like Drake.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying? Or why are people in the free school into Bobby Zankel and his group playing an extended thing of the music of John Coltrane? And this is a question about when people see the free school and they see you all, and they're saying, well, how did this happen? Where did y'all come from? But I think to explain it is that the free school is maybe in the forefront of a rebirth of art and ideas to be applied in the 21st century in the struggle to transform the society and all of that. So that's what I was, but maybe we should think about it more. But Alice and I, kicking it back and forth, kind of came up with this idea of a renaissance. And I think we can use the language of a rebirth. Something is being reborn,
Can I say, I think this point that you had brought up about how musicians like Bobby Zankel feel very at home with the free school, but essentially feel blessed to have an artistic home in the free school. I think that is significant. And I don't know if I've gotten here yet, but I take it seriously when you say that you see Bobby as one of the most ideologically advanced musicians in the city.
And in the country.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up is because just like we really hit on an important cornerstone with our town hall about the Black church, my working hypothesis for a long time is that Black music, and I would say specifically jazz, I think specifically jazz is similarly like a cornerstone of democratic striving in the city. Like, this is a city where across the color line, Black music is articulated, it's appreciated, it's developed. Like, everybody is aware, and many people have a relationship to music and appreciation of it. And I was even just reflecting because Bobby Zankel had let us know that after our event on Sunday morning, he was playing at the Unitarian Universalist Church up in Mount Airy, so closer to Germantown. And that event was kind of interesting because it was put on by someone who was a member of that congregation. And it was a tribute to Cal Massey, who I'm still learning about, but Cal Massey is the composer of many songs that we would recognize, including like Lee Morgan classics, Archie Shepp classics, John Coltrane. And so just by establishing him as the figure of that event, it was by definition like political and ideological to engage at that basis in terms of knowing the music. So Bobby and Sumi played again in Philadelphia last Sunday morning, and I had gone, but I had also met a younger musician named Daoud who plays trumpet with Bobby. And I was a little lazy because I was so tired from the event, and I also missed like being with more people from free school, but I did try to like speak to the musicians that were actually there. And it just confirmed a lot of what you both are saying, that Daoud, who has never known the free school, was
Yes,
very...
he does. And you all know his father too.
Are we thinking of the same Daoud though?
Yes.
Whoa.
Who plays the trumpet?
Yeah.
What's his last name?
Daoud Bey, I think.
No, it's a different Daoud.
No, I think it's the same Daoud.
I don't think it's
How
the
old
same
is this Daoud?
I don't know, in his 40s maybe, early 40s.
I think it's just, Daoud, his father comes to different events of free school does.
So I'm not confident we're talking
Okay, I
about the
could be
same
wrong,
person.
but I think so. But go ahead. Okay, but I'm
We
sorry.
can square
I'm
this
sorry.
circle after. But I think he was very struck by our event. He was struck by the work of free school. And even in the few minutes that we talked, his mind is on the question of how the music will be protected. And through the protection of the music, just like we talk about the protection of the Black church, how will the youth be protected? And how will the revolutionary vision or tradition be kept up for the youth? And it is striking how quickly people can move to that level of discussion in this city. And I would say that I just agree that I think that I just believe a lot in some of the musicians and artists in the city and the way that they engage with democratic struggle. And I also will say, I think John Coltrane is going to be an important cornerstone for a lot of these political questions to be worked out as well, because many jazz musicians are involved in one way or another, with this being John Coltrane's centenary. I also want to say one thing, like to the point of art or even the Black church. I think the reason that, for example, the music symposium was compelling, or the narrative format of our events is so compelling, is in our political method, it establishes both the sky, that which is creative, imaginative, and generative, as well as like delegitimizing the mythology or the ideological chokehold of white supremacy. And like, of course, I've been looking a lot at Lawson and the way he strategizes, but even in King's assessment or Lawson's assessment of those later years in the movement, I noticed that they would talk in this language of like creative struggle, basically creating something, and that nonviolent struggle establishes new, for example, social relationships. But at the same time that they would be dismantling everything that a white supremacist social system had made legitimate. So for example, Lawson would emphasize that the integration campaign, like the campaign to desegregate downtown Nashville, was also a campaign, like it was a campaign of integration, but also a campaign of dismantling. And I just find that compelling in terms of our political strategy, because I think in the nonviolent method, the means and ends are the same, or the ends exist within the means. And it's even the musical or the creative or the artistic process that just helps me conceptualize our political process better as well. And I think that we've seen that people respond very positively to that. The sky and the struggle being, contained in one. Yeah. Okay.
I think I was reminded of something because of what Kathy said about martyrdom. That King had said that no one really knows why they are alive till they know what they would die for. And I thought that,
Can you speak up?
sorry, I thought that the narrative of the first day being so squarely dedicated and centered around the current crisis that we are facing, the war in Iran being made very, very stark in this narrative, I felt was really important, because, it's not just enough for people to engage with this as history, but it's also relevant to discuss this as something that will help us today, face the crisis today. And relating Iran to Vietnam and highlighting the importance of King, I think was really, really important for the narrative. And that's why I think that it was a huge success. And I congratulate everybody who was part of making this narrative. I think, I've always found like the dance that Jamil does to be my favorite part of the whole thing. Like in both the times that we've done this, I think that the accompanying music and the way that he moves, I don't know. I think it really affects me very deeply to see that this is a people could have gone in so many different ways, but they chose such beauty to articulate in the form of music and dance. And every time he performs, I feel really moved. And I think that, going by Emily's criteria for, properly, I really appreciate that you laid down those criteria. I think that that day one really served to speak to the people, and also get us closer to the truth. I had these conversations. Sometimes I was leaving the church and going out for some air, and whenever I went outside, I was having a conversation with somebody or the other who was always there. And these 2 or 3 black men were in front of the church when I came out after the Romesh and Louis Farrakhan's speech, and they saw me and they said, "Hey man, I've never heard of a cat called Ramesh Chandra." But how does he know King so well? And then we had a conversation about how all of these political struggles, all the political destinies of people are related to one another. And they were like, "Yeah, I've heard of Lumumba and I've heard of these other African leaders, but never about Ramesh." And it really makes me feel like this is a wider struggle than I had perceived in my mind. And then, I kind of I tried to make a point that King is that linchpin that holds all of these different struggles together in a way, just through the basis of ideas. Like when you think about the Indian freedom struggle and the Black freedom struggle, what do you think about? You think about non-violence as that centralizing, connecting, bridging ideology. And the same can be said for King's ideas, like Emily was saying, how Sukarno's speech was which he gave at Bangtan, represented a lot of King's ideas as well. So, and I remember that they said to me, "But I don't think that we live in the same time as King. I don't think that we live in the same time as when King lived. Like we have these drones and we have a much more developed military system, and how the finance systems have changed and how people are a lot more corrupt than back then." And, I kind of asked him, well, do you think that he would say anything differently from what he said during his speech at Vietnam? And, they thought about it a little bit and they said, no, I think that he would say the same thing. And I think I took that as a learning opportunity. And I hope that it also made them think about what our event was trying to represent. And so I think that the narrative came out very clearly. It was a lot of history, and but it was also a representation of the growth of consciousness throughout the years, right? And that's what I really appreciate. I mean, I was talking to Brother Jibril, and he was saying how this represented to him a kind of time travel. It was almost traveling through time in a way. But then what he was also trying to say is that you're still rooted in the present, right? Your consciousness is of now, but you are traveling through how the development of consciousness has gone throughout the years. So yeah, really, really great work on that. I was also really, really moved by the panel discussion. I thought it was really well set up, and maybe this is how I was thinking about it. But when Michelle talked about her experience and said that I was feeling all these things when I was at the University of Pennsylvania, and I felt like, this can't be it. This can't be what my life was meant to be. And I was thinking about that, and then Emily was talking about Diane Nash and how she felt the same way, and I was like, oh my God, this is what Michelle is feeling now, what Diane Nash felt back then. And I think that it came together really well, all of the different elements of the panel. I think it served as a foundation for the town hall that we had right after that. I really appreciated Blaze talking about the child and about how whiteness develops a consciousness that cannot recognize the child. I think that was a really important thing for me to hear, because it's not just your child or your neighbor's child, it is the child. Can you really see the Palestinian child or the Iranian child in your children or the children of your neighborhood? When you look at your child growing up, are you conscious of the fact that you are letting him or her enter a world which you have done nothing to change? What is your responsibility to create the world that your child must inhabit? And how whiteness sort of keeps you from that. It is a counter-revolutionary consciousness. And I think throughout the panel discussion, I saw, shades of the narrative from last evening come through. And also, I think when Emily brought up Diane Nash, I'm sorry I couldn't stay for all of her presentation, but she brought up Diane Nash, and a very important part for me was that she saw herself as one with the oppressed. I think that recognition of yourself as being one with the oppressed is what allowed her to dedicate her life to a certain cause. And again, those shades of the narrative that white civilization and black civilization and struggle with each other in constant battle, what side you choose really, really matters. And I feel like that panel discussion for me was really, it was very structural, because then it led to that conversation about Black institutions and the Black church. And I agree with Jeremiah. I think that that conversation was very much about the capacity of democratic change, because when I think about Du Bois writing in The Souls of Black Folk in Of the Faith of the Fathers, I think he said that in certain there was a organized Black church for every 60 families. In some cases, there was an organized Black church for every 40 families, and the Black church was the central organizing institution around where people just did not go for religion, but they went for community, for education, for entertainment, everything. And I think that the conversation, everybody's talked about this a lot, to have a very open and honest discussion about what that institution means today, I think was really important. Because when we think about figures like King and Ralph Abernathy and James Lawson, everybody came out of that community, that sort of, that institution that shaped them in a particular way that allowed them to be who they were. And just one last thing I wanted to say was, one of the questions that Jeremiah asked during that town hall, which I think needs more discussion, because the conversation obviously went towards the Black church, but I thought it was a really interesting and important question, which is it enough to unite around Trump
Yes.
and or an economic issue? I think that I wanted more discussion around that, because that question of unity is really important for today.
Yes.
Because now everybody is saying, okay, Trump is the worst, let's get him out. So can we afford to unite? And then once he's gone, then what? What is the basis of that unity supposed to be? And even if you unite around an economic issue, like, you know, that the job market is terrible, the economy is crashing and everything. What if one day the economy is good and you get a decent living wage? Does that mean that you stop being a united front for everything else? You know, like there was a time, like I keep going back to when King gave that Vietnam speech, that Trump wasn't in office then, and also, you know, it wasn't the same economic situation as today, but people still united around a cause of war and poverty. You know, the three things: militarism, poverty, and white supremacy. I think we still have those problems, and it's still a question about around what do we unite
Yes.
to you know, face these problems. And I really appreciate, you know, Reverend Kavanaugh saying that, you know, we need each other and we must try to form a kind of coalition of some kind. I think that she said this, that, you know, we have so many of these disparate communities and societies that are all trying to focus on these small issues. But I think what King managed to do was bring all of the issues that existed under an umbrella to say that if we can achieve the transformation of society, if we can achieve the transformation of human beings, then we can actually go and try to solve these other problems. And it really does remind me of how, you know, in the Indian freedom struggle, there was a large number of people who said, you know, we have so many problems in society, we have casteism and we have religious divide and everything. We have to solve them first before moving to a stage of political independence. And Gandhi said, no, we need political independence so that we can solve these other problems. We cannot do it otherwise, you know. And that is why I think Michelle said this in the panel discussion, how nonviolence is a revolutionary modern, you know, tactic
Invention.
or an invention. It's a modern invention. If it had come into being in the 16th, 17th, or 18th century, it would not have taken hold, because the collective consciousness of humanity was not ready to accept it or go forward with it. And, you know, that really made concrete for me something that we had read so many years ago in the India reading group. We were reading Subhash Chandra Bose's autobiography, and he had said that Gandhi appeared in history at a time when when people were ready to accept him. If he had appeared in the early 18th century or in the late, as opposed to late 18th century or 19th century, it wouldn't have worked. Like, if he was there during the first war of independence for India, he wouldn't have had the impact that he had. So I think, you know, Gandhi and non-violence, I feel like, are modern inventions, and people are at this point, they have a developed consciousness to accept that right now and to move forward with it for a new struggle, a new kind.
Shall we move on to the discussion of Lawson?
Yeah, sure. Maybe we should read some comments first.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna do my best to summarize. Okay. Tara, Bambala, John, good morning. John says free school should develop a revolutionary manifesto and deliver it to the city council and the mayor's office for the 250. And also suggests a public reading and a modern analysis of the Philadelphia Negro by Du Bois at the Free Libraries. Says this modern analysis of the seminal work of social science, coupled with the understanding that immigration of educated classes of people from India and China has changed the social dynamics of the Black bourgeois. Then a string of comments where I think John is reiterating what he had said at the town hall, where he thinks the age of the relevance of the Black church is over, that most Black churches are museums now, many of them will close in the next 10 years, and that we are now in a technocratic age where he thinks revolutionaries need to be scientists and engineers. We are entering a very agnostic age now in which technology will become a god. Then names many Black science fiction writers. He says the age of King has passed. We should be reading the works of Octavia Butler and Samuel Delaney and Philip K. Dick. Then, saying what he said before about it's going to embrace a Pan-African vision to push Black Americans out of America again. Says the Muslim population in Philly, because of mass incarceration and street culture, concerns about World War III. Then Bambalai says the ruling elite want us all to be happy consumers, pay tax, work, be okay with war and die. There's a discussion about the matrix, unplugging from it, ideas that the methods of the past aren't going to work now. And let's see. Okay, Colin says good morning from Seattle. John says he thinks SCLC is not relevant and the NAACP is also not relevant. That these are, quote, relic organizations of the past, that the youth must build something new now. Says that this was a great event. Says finally got a chance to see the sanctuary of Mother Bethel and me. I went to school with Mark Kelly, Tyler, the previous pastor. And people want to see the Friday program. Yes. And Charisse Brewster said, good afternoon. Let's see. John says, Black people will abandon the church if the currency of the state collapses. We need an alternative leadership model now. Again, says we need technocrats. The power brokers of Philly are hidden from the voters, believe that. People are getting dumbed down in Philly and automation is going to hit hard. Then Bambalai says, yes, capitalism without guidance and ethics and morals is a loose cannon. Then, let's see, there's more of a conversation about hip hop music. Bambalai says music became a profit game for the most. John says the golden age of hip hop was the early 90s and late 80s and it went down in that period. Zach Coltrane and his wife use South Asian and African musical themes. Then, Treen Smith said, great question, Shantanu. I think this was Shantanu. Asking what does unity really look like beyond the imminent causes of, for instance, being anti-Trump or economic reform. And then, says we are stronger together. And then has a lot of emojis of different skin colors. And okay, lastly, John is embellishing his point about the technocrats, saying that the Ivy League is not a place for deep learning. You get a nice piece of paper, it doesn't guarantee your future. says Penn is a plantation experience for many Black and Latino students. I know many people who graduated from there. And that Asian students are encouraged to attend Penn because in some cases the home government is paying for tuition. And Bambalai then says, humanity is the common denominator. But I think those are, Shambarto had commented something, but I don't know what. What? Oh, okay. But Shambarto is also watching. Okay. Those are
Oh, I can start our conversation on Lawson, and then it'll be related to King a bit as well. Sure. So, this is, this is me wanting to develop some of what we had discussed earlier in the conversation about how we have identified King and Lawson as two very important stars in the sky in our work in the 250th this year. And to further develop many questions that were put on the table in the course of the event. So I think even just pulling from some of what we discussed in the last few hours, whether we were talking about leaders and members of the Black church, or many people who have been shaped by the Black church, having attended the Black church, or for example, the role of like artists or musicians in the city, what I feel is that many people are looking for a way to chisel the organic striving or the organic practice of love and like fellowship between brothers and sisters into something that can be a social weapon or social force. For me, this was like the very big takeaway from the town hall in terms of Art and Cavaness, like Art Thedler and Reverend Cavaness carrying this big responsibility on their shoulders. Like I essentially saw it as a contribution to nonviolent struggle in that they're working to fortify the organic responsibility that people feel to one another. And their challenge, especially Reverend Cavaness as a leader in the church, is to raise it to the level of the institution. But what I want to say that like King or Lawson or Gandhi contributed was lifting this ethic of love and responsibility that men and women naturally feel toward one another to the level of society itself, to the scale of transformation of history itself. So the way that I see nonviolence, like I use the definition that Gandhi, King, or Lawson would use, is as a science of social change. And something that they all emphasize is that even though it draws upon the qualities that are already natural to human beings, especially in their relationship to civilization, the fact that human beings imbibe ancient values of, respect or beauty or truth or love, that it is a modern invention. And I think this is even important or is connected to certain political assessments that King makes later in his life, where Emily mentioned, like, where do we go from here, emerging out of some of the process of him leading SCLC in 1967. Like, I was reading some of that book this morning because it's his last published book. And one of his formulations in the last chapter is he says, war is obsolete. And so it means that in a moment in world history in which the West is still so beset by essentially an addiction to violence and an addiction to war, the natural strivings of people have already made it obsolete, have already evolved past it. I think he's basically talking about what the shape of the 21st century political strategy will be, the revolutionary strategy. And I think what he's putting forth is, again, the same thing that Lawson identifies as King's genius, the question of nonviolence or non-existence. And King puts it that way. That's not a formulation that Gandhi made, that's a formulation that King made. Chaos or community, the beloved community or self-destruction. And I think that Baldwin saw the situation similarly in maybe I feel that it's like slightly apocalyptic language sometimes in a way that I don't think is melodramatic. I think it's accurate, you know? He says that the end destination point of a white supremacist nation that cannot course correct will be self-destruction. So just to say a little bit more about the definition of nonviolence, it's a science of social change that draws upon a natural quality of the human being, which is the force of love, the force of the soul, or the force of morality. And this is also something that we've talked about quite a bit in the last few weeks, but when Gandhi conceptualized nonviolence, I see it as the deployment, the strategization of that invisible force that he calls satyagraha, like soul force, or moral force. One thing I want to add to this point is in Lawson's autobiography, he emphasizes a lot toward the end of his life, like the first time that he met Martin. And I think this is in 1957, a year before Lawson moved south. And Lawson, from what I remember, was giving remarks. And kind of like what I remember in terms of like, I think when Malcolm X and Baldwin, like James Baldwin had first met, Martin was sitting in the first row and he was listening very intently to Lawson's remarks because I think he was talking about essentially the nonviolent method and its usefulness. And he said that when he finished, Martin's hand shot up and the first question he ever asked him, actually I have it right here. He asked about how to use the power of love in nonviolent direct action. So I'll just read a little bit from his autobiography. Nonviolence, this is James Lawson. Nonviolence had a spiritual, moral, and political power, something a lot of people did not recognize at the time. I said the love at the core of nonviolent resistance was an active force that could change and overcome evil. It was what Gandhi had called soul force, and it was the driver of nonviolent resistance and direct action. Violence, on the other hand, was driven by forces antithetical to love. Nonviolence built up a beloved community, while violence tore down the destroyed communities. Nonviolence went beyond the idea of a lack of conflict to the level of using love to address conflict and to resolve it without destruction. And then he talks about how that first meeting point between them and it being an ideological meeting point for this question of the political and the revolutionary power of love crystallized, their fellowship and their friendship the rest of their life, like their lives. And Lawson says that King invited him to lead a nonviolence workshop on the very first day of every SCLC annual convention. Like I bring this up because it's not just in the autobiography, but I've noticed it in interviews and speeches across his life, is he attributes a lot of weight to that first question that Martin ever asked him. And we, like us having studied King a lot, I've been looking at the essay Pilgrimage to Nonviolence a lot. And kind of similar to Diane Nash, King is very transparent that having studied the canon of Western thought, for him in his formal training over a course of 10 years, it takes that length of time for him to finally intellectually assent to Gandhi, a thinker that is outside the epistemology of Western civilization. And so I don't think it's insignificant that he's asking this question of what will political and revolutionary power look like under a non-Western framework or a non-Western worldview. He wasn't immediately convinced by Gandhi or by revolutionary love. He wasn't initially convinced that it wasn't just sentimentalage. And I just hear a lot of similarities between Diane Nash and King. Diane Nash saying well, this was the only game in town, and then of course King says that in the course of the bus boycott, he was fully committed afterward, that any intellectual questions he had about nonviolence had been solved in the arena of actually watching his people, be mobilized. So there are really just two more main points that I wanted to make that I had already brought up, but the first is this question of like Western civilization in the 21st century. And this is something that I had began to speak about in my panel presentation, but that had even come up while we were planning, is like, I was trying to make sense of why I feel very attracted to Thurman, Gandhi, like Lawson and King in 2026. And it took me at least like a month or two to even figure out why. But honestly, like, I think I can say more confidently now than ever, I feel that King and Lawson really worked out what is the antidote to white supremacy, what is the antidote to the fatal flaw of Western civilization. And if both of them were living in 2026, I do not think they would be surprised by the direction in which this nation has headed. You know, just that Doc calls it, you call it a sickness, you know? This undealt with malady, disease, the evil of white supremacy that is baked into the social, economic, historical development of this country and its people. I think they were deeply concerned with that question. And I really feel that, I just feel that they've really identified a key in you know, the nonviolent worldview, in something that emerges, you know, out of Asia. I think just two quick points I also want to make about Lawson. I said earlier that I felt that Lawson would be proud of us today, which I still think is true. I also think we're very lucky in that we have a revolutionary core, or that we conceive of ourselves as one, because I think he struggled following 1968 in not having a core to work with. And I feel that we would have benefited so much from working through some of these questions with him, and vice versa. The sense I get from looking at a lot of his life over the last few decades is that he was doggedly working out these questions, but it seems like alone, you know, a lot of the time, and that's the difficult part. I also want to say that reading his autobiography is very striking, because I said this to Emily, but like, I think he just comes up with a diagnosis of Western civilization pretty early on, and comes to the conclusion that, quote, there must be a better way, that the evil of white supremacy cannot be battled with a single ounce of violence. Violence in the heart, violence in speech, like violence in political tactic, very, very early on in his youth. And I think that's why Martin entrusted the tactics of this this movement that moved millions and changed world history into the arms of James Lawson. And I'm still trying to appreciate the scale of that. So I think even just this point about how King and Lawson saw Western civilization, I just want to put that on the table. And it led me to look at the way that King formulates love again. And I hadn't read some of this in a few years, but remember he says that there are categories of love. Philia, love between like friends; eros, love between lovers; and then agape, which is a disinterested love. I wanted to revisit that agape definition in particular, and I just wanted to read a line from it. He says, agape is disinterested love. It is a love in which the individual seeks not his own good, but the good of his neighbor. It begins by loving others for their sakes. It is an entirely, quote, neighbor regarding concern for others. And then I want to emphasize this part, which discovers the neighbor in every man it meets. I find that significant because what I see in it is that he has discovered a way to make Du Bois's mandate of for man to know man real, a way to make intercivilizational unity real, a way to actually create the world house, especially in this country in which you have representatives of the world present in one civilization or one nation. And then this is something that Lawson and King both say, but this is King's quote. The white man's personality is greatly distorted by segregation, and his soul is greatly scarred. Therefore, he needs the love of the Negro. The Negro must love the white man because the white man needs his love to remove his tensions, insecurities, and fears. And this is also similar to what Baldwin says in The Fire Next Time when he's writing to his nephew, James. He says, it's a terrible thing, but you must love the white man. And I really mean it. I mean, I think just to encounter some of this again, like I haven't wrapped my head around it fully, but this agapic love, they identified as core to nonviolent political practice for the 20th and 21st century. So the last thing that I just want to emphasize one more time is also something that I brought up in the panel. But King says this in 1967, 1968, and where do we go from here? I mean, and it helps a lot to know that he was kind of speaking to SCLC, but he says the movement moved very quickly, and many times we were improvising or acting on instinct. And I feel that many people who we look to in the movement will say the same thing, like in the Eyes on the Prize interviews. I know Harry Belafonte has said that, just following instinct. But after 10 years or 12 years since the boycott at that point, I mean, it's a very valuable political assessment he makes to say that we need to strategize for a longer horizon. And it's at that point that I feel he is saying we must move beyond political strategy into a revolution of values, or what I would call like a way of life, or Lawson would call a way of life. And I think that story, or where we pick up this mantle of the Black freedom movement is in the story of how nonviolence transforms from being a political strategy, a highly successful tactical strategy during the 1960s, into a way of life that all of the American people must inherit in the 21st century. And again, like Lawson would often emphasize that this was King's political genius, is that he framed nonviolence as nonviolence or non-existence. So I think just to that point, like how it becomes a way of life is that means and ends become one. And a lot of things that we've been talking about in the last few weeks, such as, the purity of your intent, or how the moral power of a people is secured, or how the American people in their consciousness, in their character can be made vital again, to just be close to God, but to also be close to man. I see all of that as a contribution toward the Fourth American Revolution, which is why I give so much credit or respect to people like Art Sudler, Reverend Cavanagh, but also these musicians that we've been working with, in our planning or just in our relationships. And I think that for me, I mean, personally, and I want to know what you think, but I do believe that Kingian formulation.
Okay.
Kingian formulation, like non-violence or non-existence. And the question for me is, how will this be done? How can we make it more possible for the people to take this up as a democratic force for social change?
Well, I'm involved in reading the autobiography of James Lawson along with Michelle and Kathy. And Kathy may have finished it. There's a couple things I wanted to say. First of all, I think you read my mind because I wanted to address the question of agape love. But before I get there, I want to say you're absolutely right that the civil rights movement, as it is known, were specific local campaigns with King's thrust towards the Poor People's Campaign and a singularly united anti-war movement. For the first time, King would become the leader
Yeah.
of a unified national movement, a potentially unified national movement. Before, he was the philosophical, theoretical leader. But now there was something new coming into existence, which would have tested the revolutionary character of that core that we identify as the revolutionary core of the Black freedom movement. And that is why I'm speculating when King said we must go forward to a poor people's campaign, or we must take on the war in Vietnam, that many on the staff of SCLC said, but Dr. King, we're tired, we need to take a break. I don't think that was the real thing. I think the real thing was, are we prepared to take on the American government in a unified struggle? And headed by revolutionaries with a singular worldview. Very different than what the anti-war movement became, by the way. And to link it to poverty and racism, that would have, I think, if successful, it would have thrown the American regime into a crisis, the likes of which we're now only experiencing. The only difference qualitatively, then the crisis would have occurred with a unified, or at least a revolutionary core led by Martin Luther King, which we lack today, and we experienced that. But I wanted to, think about this concept of agape or erotic or other kinds of love. And I have to say to you that I don't find the concept of agape love as really hitting on what King or what we're trying to get at. Let me explain how I'm thinking. See, I'm thinking of revolutionary love, by which I mean love as a ideological and actual force for revolutionary change. Now, most times when you hear, and I have to put quotes all the time, revolutionaries talk about revolutionary love, they're talking about their love for the people, which they call revolutionary love. It is them calling it revolutionary love as a way of justifying their actions, right or wrong actions. So if I contextualize what I'm doing as an act of revolutionary love, I might be the biggest F up in the world. But I can justify, this is done in the name of revolutionary love. So it is not really the type of love that we're talking about. And it fits into the self-serving binary of so-called revolutionaries who are not real. By the way, the people that have this binary have been guilty of the greatest recklessness in the name of the people. And that's throughout the world, but certainly, certainly in this country. We're not talking, and I think the thing I take from agape, the concept of agape love, it is not self-serving. So I want to make a profound separation between, quote, revolutionary love as a justification of anything, quote, revolutionaries do. Okay? But I don't want to only confine it to this Greek word, agape. I want to ground it in a struggle for revolutionary change. So when I say revolutionary love, I'm speaking of the love that functions to bring about revolutionary change. You know, more than man knowing man, man being purposeful. So I think we should think about this more as we go forward. But I think that what Lawson was struggling with when he said a greater movement in the 21st century would be called for than anything in the 20th century. The Black freedom movement only began to crystallize conceptually and in other ways what is to be done. Now it is left to us to further develop it. And I think that, and I find that Lawson and Henry Winston were trying to square the same circle. And it's the circle that we're trying to square. The answer that we're trying to discover. I think that we, based on Winston, our studies of Winston, our studies of Lawson, are closer to squaring the circle than they were. And I think, I'm going to end here. Precisely what we're talking about is what the majority of American people want to hear, want to talk about. Just like, you know, what you said, Shantanu, Emily, what you said, the conversations during the event where people said, you know, in effect, this is what I wanted to hear. I'm glad I was here because I needed to hear this. This is what I was thinking about, you know, and a certain advancement towards squaring a circle. And one of the big ones is, how is love and how is nonviolence a force for revolutionary change? Hasn't revolutionary change always been based upon violence and, quote, freeing oneself of any love for your enemies? Isn't that an imperative of revolutionary struggle, that you don't feel anything for your enemy, therefore I can carry out whatever needs to be done against my enemy because I hate him or her and I don't feel anything for them. So how is the opposite?
That comes in with the changed heart. That comes in with the changed heart. You get no.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is the point. But see, this then, let me just say, and then I'll see how is that what most people, quote, most revolutionary, and a lot of young people would think. Isn't Luigi Maggioni a revolutionary? To which we would say no. He may be heroic, he may be whatever, but he's not a revolutionary.
Is that the one that killed that?
Yes, absolutely. The question then becomes, how in the public sphere, in the throes of this political artistic renaissance, the rebirth of the people, the rebirth of consciousness, do we provide a convincing narrative, if not for everybody, but for enough people, to say that one, love can be a revolutionary force if it is the love that wishes to transform in a revolutionary way human relationships. If love is a way that people can know each other, their strengths and frailties, if love is that force that in institutions like the church can lead to a rebirth in a revolutionary way. All of this type of thing. So that's, and of course, what you're saying, John, we are talking about the heart. We are talking about the total human being. We're not just talking about abstract theory. Although we talk about abstract theory, we're also talking about the human being. And so I would say that from a Lawson point of view, who was grappling with this, with the meaning and the application in the 21st century of king, you know, that this concept of love, which is so central to king. Now, in one sense, you know, it makes sense that king comes out of the Christian church, because in Christianity is a sense of compassion and love and forgiveness. That's good. You know, it's a beautiful thing. Now, when you get to Islam, Muslims, according to which Muslims you talk to, look upon Jesus as a prophet, as a very important, highly significant prophet. And this was when Samir read Ayatollah Ali Khomeini's words. It was very obvious that Shia Islam draws upon Christian love. Other forms of Islam draw upon Christian love. So you already, and I think the Nation of Islam, especially Rasul, Ishmael's brother, who said his ministry is a ministry of love. And his mother, Sister Tanetta, proclaiming a Christ, or even in the Nation of Islam, they use the generic concept of Christ to even apply it to both the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Louis Farrakhan. I'm just saying all of that to say that the conditions, and when the conditions, at least in that regard, are ripe for this kind of discussion. But if that were not enough, now we're talking about the Black movement, but if that were not enough, the peace sentiment of the US people has never existed like this. Even during the height of the struggle against the war in Vietnam, most Americans supported the war, even after the United States was defeated. Have you seen these flags that they fly in different federal buildings and different, just bring the prisoners of war home? You've seen them. I mean, just, you know, in other words, after the defeat, where the counter-revolutionaries and pro-war people did not want to accept the defeat in Vietnam, they would always talk about, well, we still got to go and bring our prisoners. We got prisoners over there we got to bring home. That's another story. But never have so many Americans been in such deep opposition to war and genocide as we see today. Now, you know, the Black movement, of course, is the most advanced on this. There's no question about it. But white people, as I say, 20-25% have already said this white thing ain't gonna work. More people are saying that we need more than an economic reconfiguration of society. So all of this narrow trade unionism does not appeal to the masses. I learned this from Emily when she took her members will be for a strike until the day before the strike. They say, no, because we can't trust y'all leaders, you know. But I just say all of that to say, I think we're on the cusp of something. I think we can make a strong argument going forward, that love and the nonviolent resistance to evil is more real and possible today than when King was alive. And that the love that we're talking about is an active force for revolutionary change, where the only real enemies of the people are the ideology and values of a civilization that is only known and only wants war. I'm not making the argument as strong as it should be, but you see the point.
Well, this is, sorry.
Go
I was
ahead.
just going to add, because this is helping me concretize your essay on Christian love that you wrote a while back. Because if you were to ask a Christian what Christian love is, I think they would take it for granted and say that it is agape love. But
It is.
yeah, because we even
Yes.
have workshops on agape love, and we talk about it a lot. But I think what this is helping me kind of formulate is that I think King and Lawson stood at that line where they saw that Christian love was not agape love, that it had not actually reached a true agape love, which is why something like the Good Samaritan, reinterpreted through King, becomes an agape love. It's not simply like a parable that's like abstract from like the New Testament, but rather it's not self-serving like you were saying. It's actually self-sacrificing, where and it's something that King brings up in the I've Been to the Mountaintop sermon too, right? Like a reckless kind of love, which the Christian church, the Catholic Church, often claims to, but I don't think it's actually found that fulfillment to. And I think this is why even what Reverend Kavanaugh said last weekend was that like Christianity or Christ has been made comfortable. And I think this is the thing that I think we're getting at right now. I'm trying to understand better is that the church where I'm from would assume that it's an agape love, but I think what we're formulating is that actually it hasn't reached that. It hasn't actually fully reached it, because a true agape love wouldn't be comfortable actually, and it wouldn't be a simple thermometer. It would be a thermostat, like King says. It would go and be an active force in changing. So yeah, I was just saying all that to say, like, it helps you understand your essay.
And it helps me understand the crisis of the Catholic Church and the crisis of the present Pope in his confrontation with the Trump administration. But he doesn't know how to square the circle. So he, even in confronting Trump and them, is really in retreat from them. You know, as though to say, I'm not of this world. No, dog, you got to be of this world. You know what I'm saying? And even the Pope, the American Pope, needs to know King, which I don't think he does. Did you dig the thing? The equation has gotten so real right now. It's all real. It's all consuming. We are all wrapped up in this thing in one way or another, be one the Pope or one just down on the ground, be one Reverend Kavanaugh or whoever.
I thought the
Wait a minute. This concept, this is why I feel so optimistic about where we are right now. You know what I'm saying? Because, you know, you follow this thing and you listen to the Pope. You say, well, dog, why don't you go all the way with this? The thing is, he don't know how to. He does not have the intellectual, philosophical tools to speak what needs to be spoken. You can almost imagine it. Look at the way he dealt with Trump and Vance, you know, and think about how would King address it. There wouldn't be no hesitancy.
But the Pope sounds like he was saying, from what I saw on TV, I'm not interested in even interchange, having a discussion with you. That's what he pretty much
Well, that's the, but isn't that,
I mean, I got it.
No.
You're a moron. You just say that.
no,
I don't even wanna argue with
well,
somebody.
of course,
You're
that's, but that's what he said. But he abdicated his moral responsibility. And I'm arguing because he does not fully understand what his moral duty is at this time. The moral responsibility of the leader of the universal church.
Well.
Wait a minute.
Waste of time arguing with an ignorant.
No, you're missing the point. It's not that he's an ignoramus, it's that he represents a powerful government. That government has to be undone, has to be brought down. And the Pope said, I'm the vicar of Rome. No, hometown. You're more than that. You are a human being at this time with a platform from which you can speak truth to power, or goodness to evil, or morality to immorality. And he failed. And I say, my point is, he failed not because he is necessarily a coward, although he might be, but because he don't know how to do it. That is my point. You do not abdicate your moral duty in the face of immorality, no matter how ignorant or brilliant the source of immorality is. You still got a duty. You got to do what you on that platform to do. And my point is, I think we can work this out. And I think we're on the cusp of working it out. And I think in a crisis of this magnitude, the people want to hear those who have a vision, who can speak morally. This is what this anti-war thing is all about. It's immoral. It's not about the price of gas at the pump. Because if it's just about the price of gas at the pump, why are they also against Israel and what it's doing to the Palestinians? That ain't immediate material crisis for the ordinary American. If the ordinary American was just about, I want lower prices and I want to do better economically and I want to get on with my life, if that's just what it was, they would not have turned against Israel and towards the Palestinians. And I'll just shut up here. Listen to even the most crude kind of speakers. I find that so much in the MAGA movement is breastfeeding and alpha white males trying to be bullies and something they ain't. See, let me just explain to you something. See, the defeat in Vietnam affected the white male psyche. Not everybody, but a lot, because they were socialized to believe they could never take a butt whipping by brown people, peasants in particular, in Vietnam. And the Vietnamese ran them out of their ignominious defeat. Now they face the same dilemma. I thought we were supposed to be able to defeat the, quote, mullahs in Iran. Now they're whooping that behind. How is this? And what does that say about whiteness? It is a crisis. It is a crisis. That is why. And you ain't gonna win some of them. They just can't get over that white thing. That's what Lawson talks about. Why is it I'm a little boy walking to the store and a white boy, a couple white boys just come up to me and want to beat me up? I didn't do anything to them. Why do you hate me?
Mhm.
Now, white people got to work that out. Where's that coming from? And why do you think that you're going to whoop everybody else's behind and you don't never have to pay a price?
Mhm.
See, that's all I'm saying. Now, it is in this crisis of identity, of the moral construction of whiteness, the social construction, that now, in the midst of defeat, in the midst where you're going to have to answer questions that you never had to answer, that this narrative, you have to say, whether they want to listen, whether it's hard to listen to, your problem is you never learned how to love yourself or humanity. And until you get that, you're going to be on every drug that you can find. This is what I'm saying. What we're talking about is something that is so central to the crisis of the American people. And unless that crisis is resolved, democracy is not possible. That has to be resolved. And at that, well, I'll shut my mouth. You got my point. It is resolved just in the way we're talking about it. A renaissance of the human being. The old must be discarded by the people. Sweet.
Well, I kind of think it's worth us continuing this conversation next week as the
Yes.
focus. What do you think?
So, I talked.
No, it wasn't to me. But yeah, do you think maybe we could make this the topic for next Saturday?
Yeah.
I think we should.
And like do a focused conversation study.
And I often think when I'm reading Lawson Blaze, when it's childhood and everything, I say, wow, these are some good stories for Blaze to share with his children. You know, a kid could, but I think we should, if we can, to get the book, begin to read it together, and.
In free school?
Well, we don't have to read it together, but read it and then talk about it in free school.
Nonviolent, that's the name of it.
Yes, by
Yeah,
James
it's worth it.
Lawson. It's worth getting.
Okay, then
Do
maybe
you have it?
for next week we can continue off from here. This was a really valuable conversation, and I look forward to continuing it next time. So thanks to our listeners and all your comments.
Yeah, okay, yeah, just to summarize, people said that this was a great conversation. Shane Smith said greetings. President. Strongly agreed that it's no time to abdicate on moral duty. And then Shane said it was a great conversation.
Yeah.